Live. Welcome to my medieval sewing party, a Valentine's Day special episode where I will be getting dressed in a 15th century French style and we will be talking about Valentine's Day, the history, what we know, what we don't know, and I will be explaining the process of getting dressed, and then we will have a sewing party where you will get to watch me repair my undergarments. Yes, that's right, you get to see me fix my underwear. So I apologize for the tardy start. Our cats had a party while we were gone with the electronics connectivity behind our television, and so we had to spend extra time that we weren't anticipating reconnecting everything. So welcome and good morning. Let me just checking my just checking to make sure I can see everyone. Okay, so as always, if you have any questions or comments, just pop them in the live chat and I will answer them. And let me know if you can even hear me, because again, technology isn't always doing the thing we do. Oh, could you please let everyone know that I'm live? Yeah. Okay. Susan, lovely to see you. Fantastic. Yeah, so let us go ahead and get started with the getting dressed process. So I'm starting off already in my underwear. I'm wearing my 15th century style braids underneath of this smock. This is a sort of Northern European style smock, French, English, Flemish, probably in Ireland as well. They wore one of this style, which would have been called a lena, right? Geometric construction. So there's gores on the side that help give it shape in the body, but also allow me mobility in the arm. And then there are gores, those would be the triangular inserts in the body to create width in the skirt. So this is what we call geometric construction. Now, here's the thing. This one is way too big for me. I don't know what happened when I measured it, but it is way too large. It could lose about, it looks like 4 inches in the center, front and back. So yeah, it is what it is though. I'm not going to bother to put a seam in or take it in. It can just be a little large. It goes underneath of a fitted garment. So it's not that tragic that it's a little oversized. Yes, everyone, I am back from Thailand. We had a wonderful time. We had a long journey back. It was 24 hours, more than 24 hours door to door to get from Bangkok, our hotel in Bangkok, to our apartment, our vacation place here in Daegu. And that's because I, decided to save some money by agreeing to a really protracted layover in Hanoi. And unfortunately, because of Vietnam's visitor visa policies vis-a-vis the Americans and American passports, we were not able to go in and actually go and tour anything in Hanoi because you have to apply for a visitor's visa for Vietnam, and it's not as simple just go and pay some money and walk in. No, you have to have paperwork and you have to have pictures and you have to have all sorts of things. So we ended up just being at Hanoi International Airport for 13 hours. um, and then we had this horrible in the sense of it was in the middle of the night. We had this horrible 3 hour flight that took off at 2 a.m. and, landed 3 hours later, which meant there was no chance to really get to sleep. We were in economy class anyway, so not much comfortable sleeping was going to be happening. And so, basically we arrived at our apartment in Daegu feeling absolutely exhausted, just like as though we had just flown a transoceanic flight. It felt just like jet lag. It was pretty terrible. So Wednesday was really a lost day for us. But we are back. We had a lot of really great adventures in Thailand. Even though, Thailand is loud. That's my primary experience of Thailand, is that it's just very, very loud. There are so many motor scooters with the loudest grass mowing engines you can imagine. Yeah, so we're back. Glad to be in peace, the peace and quiet of a 4 million person metropolis of Daegu. How crazy is that? Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I totally understand why, Twitchy says it's a shame about the visa, but understandable given the history. Yeah, like I don't blame. If I were Vietnamese, if I were the Vietnam government, I would make that decision too. It just means that I can't just go in and tour around as easily as all that, right? It takes actual planning, and this trip was so last minute that I didn't have time to do that part of the planning. So it was what it was. I mean, at least we had a nice, comfy lounge in which we could spend the day with, really nice people, really nice staff, and good food and good drinks, comfortable seating. So It just meant that we spent a long time on the road. Whereas if we'd just gone for a nonstop flight, it would have been only a 6 hour flight. But the nonstop flights that were available when I was booking, they were all with airlines, with budget airlines, and some of those budget airlines had really bad reputations in terms of customer service, in terms of last minute cancellations, in terms of not refunding money when they're the ones that cancel the flight. So, we went with the reliable Vietnam Airlines, always an excellent airline, good service, a real airline, known a 4 star, rated 4 star by Skytrax, and known for doing things like refunding money if they cancel your flight. So anyway, to the medieval stuff. Yeah, so here I am getting dressed in what is called a kirtle. In English, it's called a cotte or a cotte simple in French. This layer of garment would be referred to as a cotta in sort of the 14th and early 15th century in Italy. Moving on later in Florence, this layer would be called a gamora, right? So this is an intermediary layer. There should be another, if I were going out for some kind of actual activity outside, or if I were going to be seen in a public setting like court, for instance, I would be putting on another layer, but I'm not. I'm inviting you all into my private quarters to join me for a Valentine's Day sewing party. And so this is it. But you should all know that for certain, for women of the upper classes, this layer is 100% considered underwear. And that's obviously modern people have a very different definition of underwear than medieval people did. But this is 100% underwear. And we know that for many reasons. One, we have court cases involving the kidnapping of women. And in those court cases, they talk about how they were kidnapped naked, in quotes, by the way, that word used specifically, in naught but their smock, their smokka, and their kirtla, their kirtle, right? So we know that by the medieval mindset, this counted as naked. And that might also, that idea of nakedness might also be part of the reason that certain chroniclers who visited Ireland in the 14th and 15th centuries, one chronicler in particular, a Catalan Viscount, Ramon de Perellos, he visits the court of Tyrone. He refers to it as the court of Tyrone. He calls him King O'Neill. And he talks about how everyone is naked there. And right, so we modern people, we think, oh, that must mean that the Irish are just running around in their all together, right? In nothing but their skin, their birthday suits, as we say in American English. But that's not true at all. Because by the medieval mindset, nakedness was a different concept. It just meant insufficiently attired, insufficiently equipped, not properly dressed, not fully dressed. Now, what is properly dressed? Properly dressed is relative, right? So this Viscount from Catalonia, traveling up to Ireland, he's going to have expectations about what all the layers should be. I suspect that what he saw was men and women in just their coats, this layer, not any layers that should go over top. And so he viewed that as being improperly dressed, as being naked. But of course, they weren't just running around like Adam and Eve in the garden. So that's a problem when you read historical texts. It's very important to try to read them from the perspective of the people who are writing them and not apply our modern perspectives.
There'd be a difference between nude and
naked. Yeah, if you're watching and enjoying, just double tap the screen if you're watching from a mobile device. Yeah. Then that's the easiest way to like something. I'm sorry, what was?
If there's a difference between nude and naked.
I don't ever see the word nude. That's a modern word too. So.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm now just braiding my hair. I'm just putting it in some braids. Oh, everyone, if you're wondering, so all of this crimping, I did a braiding experiment. We did a braiding experiment because I'm experimenting with different ways to try to create that wavy curled look on the 15th century Italian coiffure, right? And so we just put my hair in a bunch of little braids last night. And maybe actually if my hair were shorter, like if this part of my hair were shorter, like to about there, it would actually possibly create at least one of the kinds of looks that we see in the portraits. But obviously my hair is too long for the braids alone to actually create that type style of crimping. That being said, I'm 99%, I have visual evidence that women in this era are absolutely cutting their hair to actually give them a fringe so that the front part of their hair is in fact shorter than the rest of their hair. There's the miracle of the boy, which is in the Cappella Sassetti in Santa Trinita in Florence. It depicts this miracle story, horrifying but ending well, of a boy who falls out of the third or fourth story window of his family's home, and he crashes to the paved piazza below, the square below, and he dies. And then a miracle is performed, and he's resurrected, right? And there's a depiction of the mother and observers, seeing the resurrected boy, and she's on her knees, and her hair is all bare because she's been mourning, right? She's been tearing her hair out from distress. So her hair, very rare depiction of a Florentine patrician woman with her hair actually exposed, fully exposed. And you can actually see that she has shaping to her hair. It's not just hair that's uncut in any way to the back. The back is fully long, but on the sides, her hair only comes to about here. Right, so she's got this fringe that has clearly been styled, and it actually has a slight fade to it, like many modern styles, right? There's a term for that in modern hairstyling, and I forget what it's called. I think it's not a fade, it's called something else.
If you know, put it in the comments.
But she's got that hair, and seeing that, it made me realize, well, yeah, if her hair only comes to about here when it's down, then it's going to be much easier to create tight, springy curls than it is if your hair comes down to here and you try to create tight, springy curls, right? So I'm seriously pondering giving my basic hair a little more shape and cutting the part that's about this part of my face, the facial frame, right, to about here. And because that'll still be long enough to be able to put it back completely for the Northern European styles. But then it will allow me to do that facial framing more effectively, I feel like. Yeah. Curtain bangs, maybe. Haas, welcome back to the live stream. Let me see. Did uncovered hair qualify as naked, and were there levels of nakedness for hair? Yeah, uncovered hair also counted as naked. Depending on your status. Obviously, if you're a child, no one cares about your uncovered hair. But if you're a grown woman and your hair is uncovered, that is for only certain occasions when it was appropriate for a grown woman to have her hair uncovered, married or not. It didn't really matter. A grown woman, right? A mature woman, a woman who's no longer in her teens, right? Occasions when it was appropriate for it to be uncovered. If she was mourning, right? We know that women in mourning, in the extreme stages of mourning, especially, and I don't mean the protracted period months afterwards. I mean, like right after someone has died, especially a child, then you will always see women with their hair completely uncovered and disheveled. And sometimes you'll see them actually ripping their hair out. And that is, as far as I can tell, something people actually did from distress. They would actually scratch at their faces, and they would actually rip their hair out in agony and in bereavement, right? They were so bereft. So that was a time when it was acceptable for a woman to have her hair completely uncovered, and not just uncovered, but down, right? Not braided, not coiffed in any way, just completely down and disheveled. But otherwise, women who were, for most, medieval Europe's not a monolith, by the way. So I'm talking 14th, 15th century. I'm just going to keep that in mind. 14th, 15th century Western Europe, right? For most, otherwise, women who were wandering around with their hair down and disheveled, they were viewed as being not all there, right? They were touched. Something was wrong, and that was just it just wasn't done. But it wasn't practical, right? Some people get bound up in the morality of hair being covered or uncovered, and it was honestly less of a moral issue and more of a practical issue. We have to understand, and I mentioned this in a recent post, maybe in a video as well. You have to understand that chimneys and chimney pieces are a recent addition to human history, to in the West. They're a recent invention, right? So they are invented in the 12th century, but it takes a long time for homes across Europe, for everyone's homes, to eventually get a hearth with a chimney piece. So, we have 15th century accounts for dukes, peers of the realm, just in the 15th century having their palaces and castles and manor houses retrofitted with chimney pieces. What did people do before chimney pieces? Thank you for asking. There was literally a hearth, usually in the middle of the floor of the hall, by the way, sometimes on the side, but usually in the middle. There was a hole in the ceiling, and that was it. So spaces at this time were, for most people, across many levels of society. 14th and 15th century. The 15th century is the turning point where a lot of rich people's homes are getting retrofitted with chimney pieces, but middle class people, no, not unless they're rich, right? There are depictions, 16th century depictions of medieval towns. Go and look at them. Go and look at the depictions of medieval towns from this 15th and 16th century, 14th, 15th century. Look for the chimney pieces. You're not going to find them in Northern Europe. Italy is in the 14th centuries where you really start to see this rise of the implementation of chimney pieces across society. But, and you see them everywhere. But go look in Northern Europe. There's a 16th century fresco in this castle in Büdingen in Germany. It's near Gelnhausen. It's north of Frankfurt, right? It belongs to the princes of Büdingen. And there's a fresco from the 16th century. It's a dodecahedral castle, so it's kind of cool because it's actually a 12-sided ring castle. That's, just kind of, it's been there since the 12th century and it's been added to. But there's one of the halls in the medieval part has a 16th century fresco, original 16th century fresco, depicting the town of Büdingen. There is not a single chimney to be seen, none. So I want you to imagine that your home has a hole in the ceiling and a hearth on the middle of the floor, and that's how smoke escapes. It doesn't escape well if there's just a single hole. Yeah, some of it escapes, but a lot of it just kind of fills the space. So smoke is not just smoke. Smoke is smoke because it has soot in it. Soot is greasy, soot is dirty, soot, it can be smelly. It can smell good, but it can also not smell good, right? So if your hair is uncovered, your hair is going to get really disgusting really quickly. And contrary to modern misconceptions, thank you, Victorians, medieval people didn't like feeling dirty. They're humans. Humans don't like feeling dirty. Only humans suffering from mental illness don't care about feeling dirty and grimy, right? Now, yes, there's degrees of dirty, but let me tell you, anyone here exposed their hair to 2 weeks of smoke indoors and seen what it feels like at the end of 2 weeks? It's not going to be nice. Without the ability to fully wash your hair every day, which no one had in the pre-modern era, that's a luxury. Especially women with long hair, you don't have time to be washing your hair in a bucket every day. So you want to keep it covered so that you only have to wash it every so often because it's covered and it's protected so it's not getting dirty, right? So covering your hair in the Middle Ages is much less about morality and more about practicality. Now, when the Reformation comes along, well, then we have a different conversation about the morality of women covering their hair, right? And yes, obviously in the monastic orders, different conversation altogether, as Twitchy will tell you. Yep. Okay. I'm probably so far behind in the questions at this point. What are you doing?
I can see it.
Oh, okay.
It's Valentine's.
It's Valentine's Day. It is Valentine's Day here. We are in Korea. So we are for many of you in the future, shall we say. Okay, right. So I'm actually going to put on the big bling today. Although this is small bling. This is small bling. This is a replica of a gem that belonged to Beatrice d'Este. There's a portrait, several portraits of her actually, I think, with this gem. The one portrait I've seen, it's actually, she's wearing it on her fillet, right? But that's an Italian fashion. That's not a Northern fashion. So I'm going to put on my big bling today, just in celebration of the holiday and because you all love this collar so much. And this collar would have been worn with a kirtle like this. It's just that for the most part, the kirtle would be covered in another layer, which I'm not going to be putting on today. For practical purposes. Frankly, my vacation apartment, the apartment that we have when we're here in Korea, it's too small for my overgowns. My overgowns have massive trains. So I don't have the room for my overgowns. I'm in the process of making an overgown with a much more reasonably sized train. Hopefully it will be done soon. And then I will have a more modest piece of over layers to get more fully dressed for these sewing parties. But honestly, you all have met my fans, you've heard this before, but I'll say it again. I consider this to be my 15th century Lululemon ensemble, right? I've dressed it up. I've dressed up my yoga pants and my yoga top with some real serious bling. This is a replica of a collar that belonged to Maria Portinari, right? But otherwise, I'm keeping it cash, as the kids are saying these days. So this is a kerchief that I'm putting on my head. This is one of the ways, one of the easy ways that women could keep their hair covered in sort of the style crops up in about 1450, and then you see it continues well into the mid 16th century, I think, and even the end of the 16th century. It just kind of keeps getting worn because it's a very practical kind of head covering, right? You see how easy it is to put on, and it stays. Like I can, right, bouncing, right? This is going to be more likely to bounce off than this is. So this is a very secure bit of headgear. It covers my head when it's cold outside, as I've experimented by going out dressed exactly like this in the middle of the Korean winter. When it's cold outside, then this actually helps keep my head comfortably warm, but not too warm. It still breathes. When it's hot outside, this keeps the sun off of my head. And if I'm sweating, evaporative cooling for the win, keeps my hair clean. It's cute as hell, right? I mean, how adorable is this? So yeah, this is a very convenient kind of kerchief. They were called kerchiefs or couvre-chefs or coverchefs or kerchiefs. There's like, I found at least 20 different spellings for this thing. At least we think that's what this was called. That, medieval sources aren't necessarily specific as we would like them to be, right? We see lists of inventories and descriptions of clothing people are wearing that's sort of vague. So there is no dictionary from the 15th century encyclopedia that says kerchief, and here's a picture, right? So this word that we see that is referring to the linen head coverings, this is no doubt probably a kind of kerchief. Some of you said, well, what about that specific kind? Medieval 15th century people didn't seem as bound up in having necessarily specific terms. The way we do modern costumers, like we want to have a specific term for everything so that it casts an immediate visual, right? 15th century people didn't really do that, right? So the word that they use for gown, for the top layer, the layer that goes over this, is just gown. And it's gown for men and it's gown for women. And there's no specific word for a gown that is more shaped or less shaped than another one. You just kind of have to assume that when you see an expense account and it talks about gown of so many meters, that it corresponds to this picture that you see, that same woman, depicted in later on. Right? Yeah. Let me see. Maybe make a reasonable sideless surcoat, maybe in silk. Yeah, so sideless surcoats are no longer in fashion by the 15th century. No, they're not a fashionable item. Sideless surcoats in the 15th century are ceremonial overgarments only and used for court specifically. Sideless surcoats, they're done by the 14th century as a fashion item. Yeah, so it's a gown. Gown is the only over option in this era. It really is. Gown on top of your kirtle. That's it. Yeah, all of those surcoats, if you'll notice, it's always women being buried in them. Or if they're depicted in the sideless surcoats in coronation ceremonies or pure making ceremonies, right? It's a ceremonial only garment. It stopped being a fashion garment about maybe the 1380s is probably the last time it's an actual fashion garment, maybe 1400. Yeah. Kerchief. So kerchief is in handkerchief. So yes. So the word kerchief really just means like a piece of fabric, right? So no, that's not true. The word kerchief comes from the French couvre-chef, which literally means to cover your head. And then that word gets taken over in English in like the 13th century, the 12th or 13th century, because of course the Normans and the Angevins bring French and make it the language of the elite in England. And then, French and English start, getting together and having all these little babies that we call modern English, right? So the couvre-chef, the thing that covers your head, that word gets shortened because language is lazy, right? We're always looking to shorten things. So couvre-chef eventually gets shortened in slang terms to kerchief. And then eventually someone decides that, any square of fabric can be a kerchief. And so if you want one for your hands, then you have a hand kerchief, which of course in modern English is badly mispronounced to handkerchief, or hanky. But that's just the way language degrades. Language is basically one long story of devolution, of undevelopment. Let me see. Holly says maybe naming specific styles is an American thing. I was reading about how Victorian American periodicals name gowns specifically that the French just labeled gown or dress. Yeah, I mean, it could be an English speaker. It could be a more recent English thing. I mean, we start seeing in the 18th century, we start seeing things like robe à la française, right? Robe à l'anglaise. So actually it could rise, it could be a question of actually the way fashion starts becoming even more of a fashion thing, right? So, by which I mean people are purposefully trying to emulate fashions from different places, rather than just casually having clothes that are from other places because of their, careers or their jobs or whatever. Let's see, is Ryan wearing medieval clothes? He is not. There's a medieval ball here this Valentine's Day. Oh, that's very cool. Okay, so let me see. I just want to put on my belt. Okay, any other questions about anything I'm wearing before we get to the sewing part of today's activities? So I have repairs to do, right? Repairs are kind of one of the downsides of living history, is where you actually wear your garments and you wear them for real and you subject them to wear and tear, right? And so I have a camicia. This is basically a 15th century Italian smock. And the sleeves had more or less disintegrated. This was the old hem at the cuff of the sleeve. And it literally disintegrated to the point where I was able to just rip it right off. And so I'm now putting in a teeny tiny micro hem basically at the edge to replace that. So that's what I'm going to be working on today. Is anyone else working on anything? Let me just scoot you all closer to me so that we can get to the more sewing part of our party, and I talk about Valentine's because I've got some fun Valentine's stories, some of which one is new to me, and so I'm hoping it will be new to you. Clearly, I need to lower that camera a little bit. Okay, just needed some tea. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Okay, if you are enjoying this medieval sewing party, please remember to like and subscribe, everyone. Double tap your screen, right? Okay, so Valentine's Day is a bit of a mystery, right? There's a little bit of a mystery to it because it seems to, as a celebration of romance and coupling, it seems to spring up out of nowhere. And that nowhere seems to be Geoffrey Chaucer, which of course doesn't make sense. I say seems because it's the missing link, right? We're still looking for the missing link of Valentine's Day. How we got from the day, Saint Valentine, a celebration of a saint, to this very codified, very ritualized celebration of romantic love. And yes, for certain, by the 15th century, Valentine's is associated with romantic love. And that's what I can say. So the first reference to Valentine's Day is actually in the West as a romantic thing, is Geoffrey Chaucer's Parliament of Fowls, Parliament of Fowls. And he actually says that on Valentine's Day, every bird chooses his mate, right? And so he talks about the mating of the birds. And this actually ties back to a Northern European idea that February is the time when the birds actually pair off and basically start their families for this season. That was the idea. Obviously, that's not true for all the birds, but for many birds, apparently in Northern Europe, that is what people observed happening. And so they associated February with coupling, with new couples, with new relationships. Now that idea, as I've read, that concept, that seems to be very Northern European, not Southern Europe, because of course in Southern Europe, especially in the Mediterranean, they've got a different cycle of seasons. It's just not the same cycle. It's like the cycle of seasons in Thailand is nothing like the cycle of seasons in Korea. Korea has 4 seasons, just like Northern Europe does. Thailand has 2/3 seasons, depending on how you define it. The dry season, the wet season, and the really hot season. Right. Yeah. Let me see. Twitchy says, I've nearly finished my ecclesiastical embroidery. The background is half done. Very nice. Oh, nice. That's really cool to hear. Ali Push says, I have a Russian collar I keep looking at to work on, but get busy with other life. Yeah, I understand that. Oh, let me see. Yeah, that's a dead hem. What's the belt for? Ah, good question. Okay. Belt. The belt is actually, and I don't have a purse attached to it normally. This is a purse hanger, right? So why would men and or women wear belts? Well, because they usually actually had practical things on their body that they needed in their daily life. So for me as a lady, this is actually one of my aumônières. This is a knit aumônière. We have actual extant knit pouches from the Middle Ages, in case any of you are wondering. This was one that was made for me as a gift. Isn't it gorgeous? Yeah, such a fine knitting job. And so I would, men and women would actually keep pouches on this, and specifically an aumônière is an alms purse, because as a well-heeled member of society, especially as a noble woman or a noble man, it is my job when I'm out and about and I see people who are begging, who are in need, to give them alms, to give them coin, right? And that's what this purse is ostensibly for, is to hold coins for alms. Big part of medieval society was charity works, was charitable giving. It's something that unfortunately the Reformation killed really hard in Europe and in the and then by extension in the Americas, right? But that is one of the things that I would carry on a belt like this. Also, if I were outside working, doing work, and it's mucky out, then I can actually use the belt to actually kilt up my skirt, right? So that it's no longer on the ground. And you see, especially, you never see noble women with their skirts kilted up, but working women, you see them with their skirts kilted up. Kilt does not mean skirt. Kilt just means to tuck up, in case anyone is wondering about that etymology. The reason that the word kilt now applies to a traditional Scottish garment that basically was invented in the 17th century is because people in Scotland used to actually just wear this big blanket called a plaid or an arised for women, and they would belt it around themselves, and then they would kilt it through the belt so that it wouldn't fall off of their bodies, because by the 16th century things are getting very cold in Europe because of the little ice age, and in places like Scotland and Ireland it's extra important that they stay warm. So they basically are taking this big rectangle of fabric, a plaid blanket, they wrap it around their bodies, they belt it, and then they kilt it up through the belt so that it doesn't just pull straight out through the belt, because the kilting actually helps it stay up, right? Because then the weight of the kilt, the fold, allows it to stay up over the belt. That is where the term kilt comes from. Hate to blow everyone's mind, but in the 16th century in Scotland, every single use of the word kilt is to women kilting their skirts. And the word kilt, as it applies to the skirt, that pleated skirt that men wear supposedly in Scotland, that's an 18th century reference. Yeah, I know, mind blown, right? Anyway, so this aumônière, my belt, I would put something like an aumônière on the belt. And this actually ties into Valentine's Day, because by the 15th century, as I said, there is a clear association between lovers, whether physical or platonic, and Valentine's Day. And one of the very traditional gifts for a lover was an aumônière, was a purse like this, right? And we have some beautiful examples of what were very clearly love token aumônières, alms purses from this era, with this beautiful embroidery. Twitchy knows what I'm talking about, where it depicts two lovers in a garden, with one lover handing with the man or the woman, whichever, handing their heart to the other, right? And it's usually done in this gorgeous really beautifully shaded split stitch, really needle painted on, right? So a pouch like this would have made a very common love token. And so here on the feast of Saint Valentine, then it is likely there was a day when love tokens like purses were exchanged, or belts. A belt was another typical gift. Rings were a typical gift. I have, this is actually a replica of what was probably a love token. This is by Armor and Castings. You can buy it from their website, and it actually says, "Amour, amour me tient," love holds me, right? So these are the kinds of tokens that would have been exchanged on Valentine's Day. But as I said, as far as I can trace back, it's really not until the early 15th century that Valentine's Day is codified as a day of romance. Again, I'm emphasizing that that's the evidence I have. Now, if you all have any evidence of romantic Valentine's Day associations in the medieval period before the 15th century and before Parliament of Fowls, please let me know, because that would be very interesting. I have spent so much time over these last couple of years digging and digging and digging, and I just haven't found it. What I'm hoping is, as more sources get digitized and are, webbed and transcribed and searchable sources are digitized, that it'll be really possible to do massive sweeps for, a search term like Valentine through medieval manuscripts and pull out all the references to get a really better view of, Valentine's Day in the Middle Ages. Let me see. Sorry, I missed some comments. You all know I get talking. Question from Susan, what about chatelaines? Oh, Susan, are you talking about the belt? Yeah, so, stewards of the house, stewards of the castle, stewards of the home, the head steward would have keys, right? And they would also be usually often suspended from their belt. Chatelaines is kind of more of a castle thing. And, yeah, but in the homes of even the well-heeled or even the lower classes, yeah, keys would also be worn from a belt like this. But I've been doing a lot of reading up on poverty in the Middle Ages lately, because of course it's cropped up in relation to discussions about depictions of medieval people in Hollywood movies and clothing, right? So I just want to put out there that the idea that most people have of medieval poverty is not medieval poverty at all. The idea, when people imagine medieval poverty, what they're actually imagining is Victorian England for the most part. They're imagining 19th century England and maybe other parts of Europe as well, but mostly it's 19th century England. It's Dickens. They're imagining a Dickensian world, and they just kind of dress everyone in medieval clothes, but at that level of filth and squalor. But that was not poverty in the Middle Ages. Poverty in the Middle Ages was not as prolific, it wasn't as profuse, and it wasn't as profound. And it had many more relief valves and a much bigger support network than was available in the 19th century. So, yeah, you just have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about the Middle Ages. It's not the kind of poverty that we now associate with the medieval world is post-medieval, and ties in really heavily with the Enclosure Acts in the 16th century and the Reformation, because the Reformation shut down almost 50% or more of the charitable institutions across Europe that were church operated and that provided training and homes and care and clothing for the poor, right? It actually helped lift people out of poverty, or at least lifted them out of squalor, right? So you have to keep that in mind. Let me see. Okay, so back to the pouches. Twitchy says, let's not forget those pouches weren't cheap to buy, and if it was made by a lady, she would have had worked it herself, demonstrating her skills as a cultured woman. Yep. Those pouches as love tokens, absolutely a luxury item, right? I think that's another problem a lot of modern people have when they look at historical clothing, or they look at historical garments. They forget about just how different the cost of items was. So, a collar like this was an insanely expensive item. It's still not cheap now, but it was infinitely more expensive at the time, and not just because it was made of gold and had gems on it. The workmanship, the amount of handwork that would go into making something like this, an embroidered pouch, that's several hundred hours worth of work from start to finish, right? If it's completely embroidered, silk, needle painted the way I'm talking about, right? So it would have been, if it was made by the lady herself, that would have been an extreme sign of affection. Yeah. Yeah, satin stitch arrives later. Yep. Split stitch all the way, baby. Split stitch and couching, split stitch and couching, split stitch and couching. Yep. So yeah, so Valentine's Day in the Middle Ages, it's got some very interesting stories tied to it, and I read about a new one today that's a little dark, and it's because this concept of having a Valentine, that is the primary aspect that I've been able to really nail down about medieval Valentine's Day in the 15th century specifically, is people identifying each other as my Valentine. And the earliest reference to this I found is actually Shah, Duke of Orleans, who was a uh, not a refugee. When you ransom, he was being held for ransom, a hostage. He was being held for ransom by Henry IV in the Tower of London. And he was actually, I think he was there for 20 years, but he was being held for ransom, and he missed his lady wife so much that he writes her a letter in which he calls her his beloved Valentine. And I actually wrote down the original. Darn it, where did I put that notebook? I actually wrote down the quote because it's such beautiful language that I actually wanted to read it to you. Handsome, where'd my notebook go? Gosh darn it. I have a whole notebook filled with medieval quotes about Valentine's Day because I wanted to read you exact quotes. Well, that might have to happen in tomorrow's Valentine's Day cooking show. Anyway, he basically says, paraphrased, he says, "My love, I miss you so much that I am sick with it. My heart aches for our reunion," right? And this is in 1415. And this is the Duke of Orleans. So he's the brother of the king. He's a royal peer of France, very high ranking. And he has clearly married a woman not for love. There's no way they would have married just for love, not as the brother of the king and a royal peer of France. But he loves her and he misses her so much that he writes her this letter. It is such a beautiful moment, and it's extra heartbreaking because he's in England and he doesn't get back to France for over a decade. He's there so long he learns to speak English fluently enough to write poetry in English. Yeah. I can guarantee you he didn't speak any English before he went there. England was not a powerful kingdom, really. English was not the language of anywhere else but England in the early 15th century. So, he writes her this letter, and it's just such a beautiful sentiment. Later on, though, in 1477, we have a letter from Marjorie Bruce, who would become Marjorie Paston, to John III Paston, who would become an MP in Parliament. The Pastons are an up-and-coming family of the middling sort, right? They're the tail. Rags to riches is definitely wrong, but they're artisan to, elite middle class story, basically, to minor gentry. And there apparently, a marriage had been arranged between them, but it turns out that Marjorie maybe doesn't have quite the financial status. I think her family falls on some misfortune. And so John reconsiders marrying her. They're engaged, they're betrothed, and he reconsiders marrying her. And so she writes him a Valentine's letter, calling him my right well beloved Valentine. Right. And then she writes this whole thing about how if you had only half the money that you currently have, I would still marry you. Basically, don't be a greedy asshole, because if our situations were reversed, I would still marry you. Now, would she actually do that if their situations were reversed? Who knows? But she claims they would. And so there's actually, this letter is preserved because the Paston letters are one of the best preserved series of family correspondence in the history of the world, probably. And I mean that. I'm not exaggerating. It's amazing how much of their correspondence has survived the Sealy papers. And so this whole letter is preserved. And I plan on doing a reading from that I'm going to do a special this weekend at some point, a special medieval Valentine's Day story time. Yeah. So I'll be reading you the full letter in the original 15th century English with hopefully the proper 15th century English pronunciation. Yeah, so, Valentine's Day, it very clearly had a special meaning, and there was this idea of your Valentine being your special someone. Charles VI, the King of France, he actually, everyone's talking about, oh, courtly love, that wasn't a real thing, it was just a literary trope. No, it was a real thing. We know because we have plenty of court cases talking about the negative effects of courtly love. And there were multiple monarchs who actually set up courts of love. Charles VI of France was one of them. He set up a court of love in the early 15th century. And on Valentine's Day, they would actually play a game. They would actually draw names from a hat or something, from a container, a bowl, a ewer, something. They would draw names, and whatever name you got, that person was your Valentine. And then you would get to engage in a series of very, of course, socially appropriate flirtation, where you would write poems for each other and give each other little gifts, right? So that's another little fun tradition. I've always thought it would be great to do a reenactment event that was a court of love, where that was the theme, right? And obviously you would only go to this event if that's what you wanted to do, right? So if you're not comfortable with that, cool. But the point of that event would be specifically this 15th century French court of love. Very, very carefully regulated and codified, obviously. No physical interaction the physical interaction that was appropriate in the court of love was walking and holding hands, dancing. Otherwise, there was, poetry would be written and composed, songs would be sung, flirtation would be exchanged. One thing that they did do in France that's very interesting, it's called a partie jeu. So it's like this game, this divided game where it's like a 15th century rap battle, and I'm not kidding, where two people would actually basically debate each other in song, in verse, about a specific topic. And those topics were things like, what is the best kind of knight? What is the best kind of lady? And some of the ones that were written down and that have survived are actually very, very revealing, because they show that for men, it was actually important that women be both beautiful and intelligent. There was one partie jeu where the whole debate was whether it's better to have a lady love, who is really beautiful and somewhat intelligent, or to have a lady love who is really intelligent but somewhat beautiful. Either way, intelligence is really important in that figure, right? And that's modern people they have this misconception about love and affection and attraction, that it was all physical in the pre-modern era, but that's absolutely not true. And we have things like this that prove it. So these fun little games of love, I've got to get up, I've got to practice spitting more, as they say in the slang, right? I have to practice my extemporaneous versing, because supposedly this was extemporaneous, right? The topic was proposed in the moment, and then two people would step up and they would sing at each other, basically in verse. So you actually have to have the proper rhyme and meter while also expressing your thoughts. So these are the kinds of games in which people used to participate, rather than just losing themselves in a screen. And I know that's ironic because you're all watching me on a screen. But that's the kind of thing I need to practice better. I've got to practice better. I have a natural gift for the gab, for words, so it shouldn't be that hard, but I do have to practice my verses better, my extemporized partie jeu. That's another thing that would have been done on Valentine's Day, right? At the high level. Now, I don't know how far down the partie jeu was pursued or affected, right? I don't know if I haven't found evidence of, the merchant classes doing that, or the worker classes doing that, or lower than that. I haven't found evidence of that. It doesn't mean that they didn't, though, right? Because people sing, people like singing, and people are creative. So, and even in the Middle Ages, there were lots of periods of time where people couldn't do anything else, where they had to not work and not be productive. And that's hard for modern people to imagine, right? I'm never going to get any sewing done because the needles all fell out of my needle case. And now I'm having to dig for them, and I can't talk and dig at the same time. Anyway, it's hard to imagine a world in which people are not just working, because that's our modern world in the West, right? But the reality of the medieval world is that there were large periods of time when people couldn't get work done. For example, when it was dark, most people couldn't afford to light their houses and homes brightly enough to actually sew or be productive, right? So they just sat and they talked and they sang and they played games. And I would imagine that across all levels of society, even the lower echelons, people would probably engage in these fun word games where they made up rhymes and they made up songs as they went, right? I think it's a lie, especially that the oligarchs today want us to believe that people were so poor in the Middle Ages and that we have it so much better now. In some ways that's true, and in other ways it's patently not true. Yeah. Yeah, Sarah, I would love to be sewing, but I can't seem to find any actual sewing needles in my pouch, unfortunately. So I'm going to show you all my replica medieval needle cases, and I want you to tell me what you think they would look like on a TSA, on an X-ray scanner at an airport, right? So if I travel somewhere for a medieval living history thing and I put these in my luggage gets inspected and shit gets stolen and gets broken. If I put this in my carry-on, then it looks like a bullet and they want to inspect my bag. So every time I go, I just decided I'll just take it with me in my carry-on because I'm tired of things getting broken in my checked baggage when they inspect the bullets, right? So I invariably, I pull it out of my sewing pouch and I open it up and I put it so that they can see it's not a bullet, right? But that means that every single time the needles fall out, and then they all fall out into here, into my travel sewing poof, and then I have to find them. And unfortunately, my condottiero wandered out to do something else, and so all of my needles are God knows where. Oh wait, there are needles right over there. I'll be off camera like literally 2 seconds, 3 seconds out, or if I stick my hand in a bunch of needles and hurt myself. Okay, is this the right kind of needles? Yes. Okay, great. Mama, welcome then. Welcome to my medieval sewing party where I sew and talk, and you all are welcome to ask me questions. So yeah, Valentine's Day. We have this evidence of these courtly games, and we know that in the court of Charles VI, they played these courtly games on Valentine's Day, but they also did it on the first Sunday of every month. And if I read the original source properly and correctly understood it, then apparently what would happen is on Valentine's Day they would pick their Valentine for the remaining of the year. And then every first Sunday would be one of these court of love days, first Sunday of the month. And then at the next Valentine's Day, they would pick a new Valentine for the next year. That's how I understand the process. And so I thought that would just be a really nice, fun, harmless, flirtatious thing to do amongst a group of friends, right? And it would encourage you to find creative ways of expressing admiration for the person. But then this idea of picking a Valentine, there's a couple of dark instances of it. Any of you have read Hamlet? You've read Hamlet? Hamlet, not Hamnet, not that terrible, terrible garbage movie that just came out. Hamlet. I have some feelings about that movie because the clothing and the hair is so infuriatingly terrible. It just pisses me off on every score. But Hamlet, the actual play by William Shakespeare, there's a scene after Ophelia goes mad, right? After Prince Hamlet has rejected Lady Ophelia, right? And she goes mad, also not just because he rejects her, but because he also kills her father, right? He slays her father. He doesn't think he's killing her father. He thinks he's slaying the perfidious king, his uncle, who has murdered his father and usurped his throne. Turns out it's Polonius hiding behind the tapestry, though. So her father's dead. The prince who swore he would love her has forsaken her, and so she goes mad. And one of the songs she starts singing when she goes mad is this really dark little ditty, right? It's basically it's autobiographical is what it is. And she says, what is she says? Today is St. Valentine's Day, all in the morn betime, and I am made at your window to be your Valentine. So up he rose and donned his clothes and dooped the chamber door, let in the maid, that out a maid ne'er departed more. Right, so that's a late 16th century reference to the idea that Valentine's Day was a day when you picked a Valentine, and especially in the lower classes, that seemed to involve an exchange, a bodily exchange, a very physical exchange, not just an exchange of vows. But the idea was that it was supposed to be that if that exchange happened, then that was basically a betrothal. That was a kind of marriage. How do we know that? Because in 1486, one John is supposedly courting this servant named Alice. John is a skinner. And I don't mean that like a psycho killer Skinner. I mean, like, he's a person who basically processes the hides. He's a Skinner, right? He is part of the process of turning animal hides into leather, right? And he's courting this woman named Alice. And according to witnesses, on Valentine's Day, on February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day, in the presence of witnesses, he identifies her as his Valentine, and they exchange vows. Literally, he says, "Will you take me as your husband?" She says, "Yes, I will." And then everyone, he sends out a servant to get ale. Or not a servant, he sends out a friend to go buy ale. She brings the ale back, and they drink it, and they toast the new couple, right? Well, 2 years later, he apparently claims that this never happened. And he's apparently trying to contract another marriage, and he's having the banns read, and Alice disputes it. And so there's actually a whole list of witness testimonies that have survived from this court case from 1488. The court case is in 1488. The incident, the supposed Valentine's Day marriage, was 1486. And one of the key parts of the testimony attesting to the fact that this is a valid marriage, the thing that everyone keeps emphasizing is that John said, "You are my Valentine." And then, of course, they toasted and celebrated, and they actually exchanged vows in front of witnesses. This also shows how the marriages and weddings were not the kind of codified thing that we all think that modern people think they were, right? It didn't have to be a church wedding. There didn't have to be a mass to celebrate it. You just needed to exchange vows in front of witnesses, and that was enough to get the job done. So anytime someone says, "Oh, I want to have a medieval wedding," I have to say, what do you mean by that? Because I don't think what you think of as a medieval wedding is probably not what it really was. Yeah. Let me see. Do you remember what the case was called or where it can be read about? Yes. Well, the case, it's not called a case because it's like the two parties are, it's so-and-so versus so-and-so, and it's I'm going to say William Ferris. No, sorry, John Ferris and Alice Sells, I think. I wrote this all down on a notepad that has magically evaporated because, that's how my morning went when we ran into those technical difficulties of the cats having completely unwired our internet that that I don't know what I did with the notepad. I'm going to do a post about it, though. I'm going to do a post, and I'm going to do a short about it. There's actually this whole fun website. There's a scholar who has webbed a whole bunch of marriage cases from late 15th century England, transcribed and translated, so you don't need to read Latin or be an expert in paleography. And they're really interesting. There's only one case that pertains specifically to Valentine's Day, but it's very interesting. I do plan on making a post about that. I literally just found it this morning when I was not expecting. New, brand new. I've never even seen this website before or any of these cases. So yeah. Do you remember what the case? Oh yeah. Okay. Let me see. Just scrolling back. Tell me why I don't like Hamnet. Okay. Why I don't like Hamnet. Fair question. For one, the costumes are terrible. This is supposed to be about real people, not fantasy people. This is supposed to be about real people who actually lived. And the clothes are not even slightly accurate. The colors are wrong, but I could forgive the colors if the shape of the silhouettes were right. The silhouettes are so wrong as to be laughable. They would be fine at a Ren fair. They'd be fine at a pirate fair. They'd be fine at a mermaid fair. They are not accurate for second half of 16th century. Shakespeare and his wife never wore clothes like that. She's always wandering around looking like a madwoman in raggedy clothes with her hair down, or her hair styled in a very modern fashion with like the top kind of put in a ponytail. It's just it's so wrong, it's distracting. Anne Hathaway is the name of Shakespeare's wife. That is the person she's supposed to be. They call her Agnes, but that's because of a mistake in a will, a clerk's mistake. She's called Agnes in her father's will, but she's definitely called Anne Hathaway in other places. So the character of Anne Hathaway, who's this real person, is just depicted so inaccurately that I can't see it. The forest witch thing is also no, just no. In in Reformation England, you are not going to do anything that is going to set yourself apart as being a forest witch, because that's a way to get burnt at the stake, right? So she's not going to walk around dressed differently. She's not going to walk around with her hair uncovered, because that would identify her as different. She's going to go to mass every week, because if she doesn't, she's going to have to pay a fine. They fined you for not going to church in Elizabethan England. And if she persistently does that, she's going to come under investigation, and it's not going to end well for her. So I just can't believe anything about the story. Nothing about it can I believe. I can't. It's just everything is too wrong for the era. Now, if they had made it about fantastical fantasy people in a world, in a kingdom called Dingland, no problem. But it's not. It's supposed to be about real people who really existed. And it's just, it's all wrong. The shoes are wrong. The clothes are wrong. The hair is wrong. The way that characters are depicted, the interactions are wrong. So wrong. That is not how people interacted in Elizabethan England. So I just can't buy it. Right? It's just so distracting. That's why I don't like Hamnet. Again, if it had been a fantasy story, no problem. That's why I can watch Game of Thrones, and well, I can't for other reasons. I can't watch past the first season. The second they kill the hand, I'm done. This world is all full of injustice. I don't need to watch a show about a world full of injustice. But actually, the clothes and the silhouettes and the colors in Game of Thrones are more accurate than most Hollywood movies and than most television productions that have come out, historical ones that have come out in the last 40 years. Isn't that sad? Do you know how much the fine for not attending church would have been at the time? I do not remember what it was. I do not. So I'm not even going to pretend. I'm not going to pretend. But it was sufficient to make you want to do it. Right? It was not a token fine. It was a real fine. Let me see. Ika, welcome. Thank you for joining us from India. Yeah. Vaccinator says, I normally come in for random people on live, but this rule's too hard. A lot of knowledge in a short amount of time. I've got your back, sister. Vaccinator, welcome to my community, my friend. Welcome to the court of the Contessa, or in this case, my sewing circle. Yeah, let me just scroll back. Okay, yeah, so that's why I don't like Hamnet. Here's, okay, so why does accurate clothing matter? Why does accurate hair, why do accurate hair and accurate clothing matter in a historical movie? Here's why. I've taken long walks up mountains and rivers and peaceful places where I can just ponder this crap for long hours. And here's what I realized, because yeah, it's a good question. It's a valid question. Why? Why do I care? Why does it matter how people are dressed and how their hair is? I mean, other than the fact, beyond the fact that I know how they should have dressed and how they should look. And so I just can't believe the actual history. So there's that, right? Once you know how people should dress, should have done their hair, then, and how they should have interacted, then seeing it depicted so inaccurately completely pulls me out. I cannot follow the story. I am so distracted by the visuals being so wrong. But beyond that, it's actually deeper than that. The thing about clothing and hair is that it impacts how people interact with each other. And so there are often key plot points that revolve around, for instance, well, he fell in love with her because of her hair. He wouldn't have seen her hair. He couldn't have fallen in love with her because of her hair, right? Or the clothes they're wearing allow them to move in ways that are completely inauthentic, right? Allow them to therefore behave in ways that 15th century people, 14th century people, etc., could not have behaved because they didn't have those kinds of clothes. The kinds of clothes they had forced them to move and interact in a specific way. And so now the history is completely unbelievable. I can't believe that he would do that. He did that weird plie thing to get onto the back of the horse, because if he'd been wearing all the proper layers, he couldn't have, right? Because they would have gotten in his way. He couldn't have done that. So yeah, that's why. It's because also fashion and hair play a big part in how humans historically interact, about how they're attracted to each other, about whether they like or dislike each other. And so if they're not wearing the proper clothes and their hair is not done in the proper way, then the story is unbelievable to me, because there's no way any of those things would have happened in that era. Again, if you don't want to depict people in relatively, I don't mean that they have to hand sew it and weave it from heirloom sheep using original dye stuffs. You can't see that in a movie, but the silhouette, the shape should be correct, right? The basic hairstyles should be correct. And don't tell me, oh, actors and actresses would be uncomfortable if they did it accurately. Bullshit. They're just as uncomfortable in the fantasy shit that these directors approve, right? That these movie makers approve. But also, historically, actors have always been a little bit uncomfortable in their costumes. That's part of the point. It actually allows you to understand your character better, right? Yeah. Let me see. Twitchy says, because we have such a lack of good historical education and a world perpetuates myths that dehumanize the people who came before us. Films are a good way to introduce people to different worlds. Yeah, so there's that also. The other reason I wish that all of these big productions would actually use accurate clothing and accurate hair and accurate material culture is because for many people that is their only exposure to history, right? And so this is how they are learning about this history. And so, as Twitchy says, it just perpetuates these terrible, terrible myths that aren't true. So that's another reason I would really like these productions to actually depict people in accurate silhouettes. Again, I don't expect it to be 100% accurate, but I'm going to tell you, authenticity is a spectrum, right? How accurate, I've said this before, and some of you've heard it before, but we've got new viewers, so I'll say it again. Authenticity is a spectrum, right? How authentic, you can always make your clothing more or less not less, you can make it more and more authentic. There is no bottom to authenticity because you can make it so the shape is authentic. You can make it so the stitches are authentic. You can make it out of fabric that is woven using a replica medieval loom. You can make it out of fabric that is woven on a replica medieval loom that is produced using heirloom sheep's wool from sheep that actually would have existed in the Middle Ages. You can do all of that plus sheep that are fed on a diet of heirloom grass. You can do all of that plus, right? There is no bottom to authenticity. As an organization, you can decide what your rules are for authenticity, but there's no bottom. So no, I don't expect 100% authentic clothing. The only 100% authentic clothing, really and truly 100% authentic clothing, is clothing that has survived from the Middle Ages or that we travel back in time and get. Right? That's it. That's the only true authenticity. And anyone who claims otherwise is deluding themselves. They don't understand what what the word authentic means, right? Or they have a different definition of it. So no, I don't expect 100% authenticity, but at least it should be, at the very least, the silhouettes should be correct. And, the basic hairstyles and hair coverings should be correct. Yeah. Yep. So back to Valentine's Day. A lot of the modern practices of Valentine's Day are not medieval cards. Exchanging of cards. That's a Hallmark thing. That's a late 19th century thing as far as I can tell. But, exchanging love tokens was not just something reserved for Valentine's Day in the Middle Ages. Love tokens were exchanged basically at all times of year. And, you would often, I need to do more waxing on this. You would often, very often love tokens were not necessarily exchanged between husband and wife. There were a great number of extramarital affairs in the Middle Ages. We know this from court cases. And there's one court case. This was a fun one. There was one court case where I think it was Florence, actually. Yeah, it was Florence, where two lovers, this is in the 14th century, blame medieval French romances for their affair, because the case basically says they claim we shared a love of the same books that we would read together until one day we didn't read anymore. So they actually blamed the courtly romance literature from France as leading to a degradation of morality. They tried to get out of these adultery charges or to get leniency as the adultery charges as being the victims of that wicked French culture. Because the French romances, they go everywhere. They spread all across Europe from the 12th century going forward, and they're translated into all sorts of vernacular languages to maximize understanding. So, by the 14th century, you don't have to read French to be able to read all these Arthurian legends about knights and ladies getting it on in the woods, right? You can do that in your own local language. Great times. When in doubt, blame the French, right? Oh, Twitchy, you English, you're so cute. I know you're saying that very tongue in cheek, but it's still funny. Yeah, so I love the idea of these two people claiming that all they did together was just read, and then one day they couldn't resist it anymore. Like it was just an accident, but it only happened once, and it was all because of the book, the French literature. I wonder if more homo-romantically inclined use Valentine's Day to express their more emotional feelings for each other in the more socially acceptable ways too. Yeah, possibly. Speaking of which, I've been reading up on poverty in medieval France and Paris specifically, and there are a lot of cases of poor, well, impoverished women, impoverished single women, not just widows, impoverished single women cohabitating. Now, this is noted because, it's noted in the tax account rolls, and it is mentioned not in any romantic fashion. It's just them cohabitating, and I wouldn't want to overread into it. But marriage would have been a very good way for a woman to secure a financial future for herself. So it is interesting that there are women who, for whatever reason, weren't getting married. Now, it could be because there weren't enough menfolk. It could be because the financial package that they brought to the marriage, any marriage, was not attractive enough to secure them a spouse. But all of this cohabitation that I've been reading about could have been intentional and may have perhaps occasionally been romantic in nature. Again, the records don't say anything about that. It's these records are extremely factual and very objective and very much focused on the financial status of the people who were being recorded in the tax rolls. It had nothing about the nature of their relationship. But there are a large number of women, poorer women, cohabitating in medieval Paris. I'm just going to put that out there. If we're blaming the French, I'm game. Yeah. Yeah, the topic of homosexuality and homosexual relationships, it's a challenging one to explore in the historical record for many reasons, because of the post-Reformation world in which we find ourselves, and the way, especially in Western society, affection, just regular affection, not romantic affection, just affection between men has been demonized and moralized and completely misinterpreted. It can be very tricky for us to then look at medieval primary sources and read them as just brotherly affection, friendship affection, right? Rather than as eros, right? There's a difference between those kinds of love. So, but then we might be underinterpreting the historical record. Perhaps we might be reading a text that maybe is actually about two men in love or two women in love, and maybe misinterpreting it as just brotherly love or sisterly love or friendship, right? So, but that's part of the challenge. That is really part of the challenge, is trying to interpret these historical texts in the appropriate light and not bring our own baggage to the table. So that's one of the reasons that the study of non-heterosexuality is hard, very challenging in the historical record. There are very few instances where it's just very plain. There are some where it is, but most of them are in that gray area where it depends on how you look at it. Yeah. So I want to put that out there. That's part of the challenge. And I think that especially in the politically charged world in which we currently live, that it is triply challenging to actually approach these primary sources from an unbiased perspective, because everyone has an agenda, whether it's intentional or not. And I try to approach sources as neutrally as possible, but I'm human and we have bias. So yeah. Two knights exchanging valentines, a mark of appreciation of the other's feat of arms. naturally. I mean, but that's true. I mean, two knights, especially knights who've never met each other and before exchanging tokens as an appreciate, I know modern knights, modern men at arms who do that, and they're not interested in each other in any way, but they do have real admiration for each other's deeds of arms. So, it might just be just a token of appreciation for prowess and not for anything else. I think we also associate homosexuality with just sex today rather than a more complex set of feelings and behaviors that we often no longer recognize or engage with. Yeah, twitchy 100%. Um, and we forget that the spectrum of human emotion is much more complex than a box or two or three, right? And it's way more complex, and it's way more complex than just sexual or non-sexual. That really blows a lot of modern minds. By the way, if you're all enjoying this, please double tap that screen and consider subscribing. Yep. It's really important, I think, that I think men would be much happier in the West if they were allowed to do that, to just exchange tokens of affection and appreciation without them being overinterpreted. Yeah. But also with the room to allow them to be more freely interpreted if one wished. Right, so is anyone sewing anything today? Twitchy, are you working on your embroidery as we speak? So for those who are just joining, this is my medieval sewing party. Welcome. I'm the Contessa. I am today attired in my Burgundian Lululemon, as I call it. I am working on repairs to this smock. This is a 15th century Florentine style camicia, what we call a smocca, smock in 15th century English. And I've worn it for so long. I've had it for so long. I made it in 2018. So I've had this for so long that I have worn out the cuffs of the sleeve. So I am re-hemming the sleeve. I literally just ripped off the old hem. It was disintegrating anyway. So I didn't have to pull very hard to just remove it. And it had just completely worn away. You can see all that wear, right? They completely worn away. So now I'm putting in a new hem and just doing that while we discuss a variety of topics about medieval history. We started off on the topic of Valentine's Day in the Middle Ages. If you have any questions about Valentine's Day or any myths you've heard of about the Middle Ages at all or about Valentine's Day, feel free to pop them in the chat. I will absolutely answer them. Captain Rail says, I've heard rumors of early gay English nobles, but they were not entirely trusted sources. Language and culture is different. I wrote a sociology paper in college about the concept of people judging. Yeah, so here's the other problem with interpreting the historical record when it comes to homosexuality. Depending on the era and this place, homosexuality could be more or less accepted. And there are times, certainly in the Middle Ages, it was one of them, where sodomy was a crime. It was on the books in a lot of different places. It was a crime, and it was prosecuted. We know of people in what is now the Czech Republic, in Bohemia, who were burnt at the stake for being convicted of sodomy, right? And sodomy was at that time more specific of a definition than it is in certain, like I'm thinking the military code of justice, uniform code of justice, which calls sodomy anything that isn't just missionary style sex. But yeah, so depending on when and where you are, sodomy could be viewed as a moral failing. And especially as a man, as a powerful man, if you were viewed as being the bottom of a homosexual relationship, then you were viewed as being weak and womanlike, and that was unacceptable. So this is the weird part about it. Like, if you were the top of a homosexual relationship, say in 14th century England, that was less of a concern than if you were viewed as the bottom. So that is why the sources about Edward II can be questionable of England, right? There's a lot of talk about his favorites and how he preferred to surround himself with men, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that was sexual in nature. He may have just been more comfortable in the company of men than in the company of women. We know he was able to sire a child from his queen, so, it wasn't entirely impossible. But specifically after his death, after his downfall, after his removal from power, after he was usurped, his usurpation, the chronicles a lot of them go a long way to basically blacken his name. And so a lot of the chronicles that talk about him after that especially are written to present him in as unflattering a light as possible to a contemporary reader or a contemporary listener. And one really easy way to do that is to present a king, a knight, as being at the bottom of a homosexual relationship. Right. So we don't know how much of what is said about Edward II is true. I will tell you, though, the way in which he's reported to have died is not real. That was invented decades after his death. He was probably just murdered quietly in his cell or left to starve to death, which is pretty awful. Please don't get me started on my backlog of sewing, all the things that need sleeves reattached, modern clothes. Yeah, I have a basket of things that need repair. And there's a point at which I've decided that certain repairs I'm just not going to undertake. I'm going to pay someone else to do them. My historical garments, I will do the repairs because those are very specific and special. But my modern clothes repairs are so affordable in a lot of the places where we travel, like Thailand, like Korea, that I will just pay someone else to do those repairs so that I can conserve my time and my creative energies for the historical stuff. Um, I have to say there is a certain, I have a certain limit in creative energy. It ties a lot to the daylight. Actually, I'm a daylight person. So if I'm going to spend my creative energy on something, I really would rather focus on a new thing than repairing an old thing. Right? I am that kind of creator, always looking for the next new shiny thing to make. On the other hand, if I don't have someone that I can trust to do the appropriate repairs, then I have to do them myself. And in this case, I want these repairs to be done by hand because this is part of my garment that will be seen because it's the cuff, so it will poke out and people can see if it's machine stitched or hand stitched. And I don't actually care. I care for me, right? I want to have the right look. I don't judge other people who have machine top stitching, machine inside stitching. No, I don't judge other people. It's for you to decide your own level of pain. For me, for my purposes, I just want the picture that I present to be everything visually correctly medieval, correctly authentic, hand sewn, no machine stitches, that sort of thing. That's a me thing. That's a standard I apply to myself, not to other people. Authenticity is a spectrum. Your journey towards authenticity is your own, and you should be allowed to explore it freely at your own pace. Yep. Let me see. Jorge, bienvenido, bienvenido. ¿Qué tal? Acabo de regresar de Tailandia. Yep, I just got back from Thailand. Thailand was really, God, there was so much. We had some really great experiences in Thailand. So we went to Chiang Mai again for the second time. So that's northern Thailand. That's the highlands. It's a really beautiful part of Thailand. Normally very green, very verdant, lots of beautiful hills, but it's the dry season, so it wasn't as green as it normally is. But it's a quieter part of Thailand. They have tea plantations and beautiful mountains for hiking, right? It's a much smaller city than Bangkok, much less loud than Bangkok. And there's a different culture and history in northern Thailand because that was the Lana kingdom in the Middle Ages. And so we actually got to take a traditional Lana cooking course. And it was basically a medieval living history experience. If we had just not included chili peppers, everything would have been authentically medieval for Thailand. And everything we did was using medieval equipment. We had medieval style cleavers, we had a medieval style cutting board, medieval Europe. We had mortars and pestles. We were cooking on clay stoves with coals, on clay pots and cast iron pots. It was fantastic, using long handled implements made out of the local wood, which was coconut, right? It was fantastic. We got to make 4 main dishes and a dessert, all of them entirely plausible for medieval Thai cooking, if you just subtracted the chili peppers, which of course were introduced in the 18th century or the 17th century and became sort of more widespread in the 18th and 19th century. It was a fantastic experience. On my travels if you're interested in that kind of content, I have a whole travel channel, Travels with the Creative Contessa. Lots of videos I posted from our trip to Thailand, lots of posts in the community post, and I'm going to be doing some cooking, Creative Contessa travel cooking cooking parties where I'm going to be making some of these dishes together with you. So we're going to be grinding stuff in a mortar and pestle. I'm going to make some sausage. We're going to make some of these curries that you never see ever, ever, ever on menus outside of northern Thailand, let alone Thailand itself. So if you're interested in cooking of a more modern type, but based on, cultures from around the world where I experience things and travel, then check out Travels with the Creative Contessa. This channel is my medieval living history stuff. So I try not to mix and match too much in that regard. Occasionally they overlap though. So sad it's a Saturday at the Medieval Village without you. Oh, Willow, thank you for joining. Oh, it's lovely to see you. I hope you're feeling better. Yeah, one of the reasons we went to Thailand was to go. There is a medieval village there that is kind of a mecca for geekdom in Bangkok. And I actually taught, there's a live stream. You can watch a recording of the live stream. I actually taught a 3.5 hour dance workshop last Saturday. It was a lot of fun. We taught 2 dances, Anello and Pizzocara, 2 authentic 15th century Italian dances. And Willow was there. She came out and danced even though she was half dead from the flu that's going around and kind of getting everyone this time of year. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. Really good participation, even though it was announced very last minute. But yeah, it's something I like to do is travel the world and teach medieval and Renaissance dance. People actually hire me to do that, to go travel the world, be the Contessa at their respective event, teach medieval and Renaissance dance, teach all these handcrafts. So if you'd like me to come to your event and bring the magic, reach out to me. I can absolutely do that. I have a website, thecreativecontessa.com. Let me see. Jorge says, I've told you before, you're amazing and I love everything you do. Oh, thank you. Question, do you know how to make medieval perfumes? If so, could you teach us? Funny you should ask, Jorge. Thank you for that fantastic question. One of our partners, one of my maybe soon-to-be partners, is a company called Cosmetica Obscura. These are 2 lovely ladies who are reproducing medieval cosmetics and perfumes and body lotions, etc. Check out cosmeticaobscura.com. They have amazing products. They make them based on the original recipes. They have modified them so that they're not toxic. And of course, in some cases, they've had to interpret them because some of these original recipes from medieval sources aren't 100% clear, like cooking recipes are not clear from the Middle Ages. But some of the ways in which medieval people made themselves smell good, it's not necessarily like modern perfumes. Modern perfumes tend to be alcohol based, and medieval perfumes weren't. They didn't. Distillation is a latecomer to Europe, and the first applications of distillation are for alchemy. So perfumes were not alcohol based. They were either make powders. You would make sweet smelling powders, and the smells were different too. So you would actually make powders from spices. From a lot of spices we now make desserts with in the West, especially at Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? Christmas spices, those autumnal spices, right? Those pumpkin latte spices. Those were used to make your hair and your skin and your clothes and your home smell sweet in the Middle Ages, right? So for the wealthy anyway, cloves and nutmeg and cinnamon would be ground together and then sometimes mixed into an oil, or actually just sprinkled into your hair or into your veil or your coif or your headdress if you're a man, your hat, to make it smell good. The oil could be applied to your scalp or to various parts of your body to make you smell good. On the lower end of the spectrum, spices being very expensive, herbs were used by people on the lower end of the spectrum. Sweet smelling herbs that we even know today, like lavender, right? But other herbs that are much less common now that most people don't even realize are edible or usable in any way. We view them as weeds. So that is how people generally achieved sweet smelling persons and spaces in the Middle Ages. Not perfumes like we understand them, not the alcohol based ones, but oils in which spices and herbs had been steeped, so that the herb or the oil is then infused with that, or just powders, full stop. You just put the powder, sprinkle the powder on, and then you'll smell sweet. Yeah, so that's how people smelled sweet. I'm hoping to have the ladies from Cosmetica Obscura on one of my medieval sewing parties so that you can ask them all your questions, and maybe they can do a makeup demo, ancient Roman and or possibly medieval cosmetic makeup demonstration, so you can see how that medieval makeups were actually applied, the kind of aesthetic they were actually going for. Yeah, Twitchy, I'm sorry for those of you abroad, the shipping and the tariffs, it's gruesome. I am so sorry about all that shit. I am so sorry. It's bullshit. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I feel it on the inverse. What did Valentines give each other before chocolates? Very good question. Thank you for asking, Zach. So the kinds of love tokens that were exchanged in general were things like rings, like this ring. This is actually a replica of a medieval love token ring from the 15th century. And it actually has an inscription on the side. There, you can see it. Well, you can see it, but you probably can't read it. It says, Amour me tient, love holds me in its grasp, right? And so rings were a common love token that would have been given on a date to your Valentine. Pouches, aumônière, alms purses like this, um, ranging in quality from simple to knit like this one, which is a more nicer quality, or fully embroidered with amazingly detailed silkwork just all over it, depicting two lovers, right, in the lover's garden. Belts like this one were a love token. Stockings were another kind of love token. Talk about an intimate part of the body for men and women, by the way. Shoes were another love token that was common. Again, these are all items that are worn against the intimate parts of the body. Rings, stockings, shoes. The aumônière, this pouch, is an object that would be used in daily life. Right, so these are all ways to keep your Valentine in mind. I haven't really read anything about food as something as a kind of love token. I haven't read any kind of, if any of you have any evidence of food being a medieval love token, do let me know, but I haven't seen that. I have not seen that personally. Oh yeah, Twitchy, we definitely have to do an embroidery live stream together. Yeah, we need to schedule that. That's no problem. We can totally do that. We just need to get together and schedule it. I think that would be absolutely fantastic, especially once I get my embroidery set up for my new miter, right? Yeah, because then we can be embroidering together, and how awesome would that be? 100%. Let me see. Best food is Thai food, spicy food is great. So, a note about spicy food. So many of you probably associate chili peppers with Asian food, Asian cuisine, right? Like Korean, lots of Chinese cuisine has lots of chili peppers in it. Thai cuisine, lots of Jesus Christ chili peppers, right? But Malaysian, holy God, Malaysian curries are like napalm in your mouth, but they taste so good, but they hurt so bad, right? But chili peppers are part of the Columbian exchange. And so they are a New World plant. They were from Mesoamerica. They're from Mexico, actually. And they didn't even get introduced to Asia until Southern Asia via the Portuguese until the 16th century. But their uptake was really slow because they hurt, and people didn't understand why you would want to hurt yourself with your food. And so it wasn't until people got desperate because they grew really well. Chili peppers, at first they were apparently ornamental plants. So that's what actually got them spread around Asia initially, is that they were ornamental plants, not for food. They were pretty. These beautiful little chili peppers, all shiny, bright colors, right? Looks like little Christmas trees. Especially especially the cultivars where you have multiple colors of chili peppers all in the same plant, right? So at first, tomato plants and chili pepper plants were ornamental. Eventually, some people got desperate enough to say, I don't care how much it hurts, I'm still going to eat it. And then eventually that kind of spread out, and people worked their way up to eating that kind of level of hot food. But in places like Korea, it was only the poor people who ate the chili peppers at first, and they used them to prolong the shelf life of their fermented vegetables, of their kimchi, because they noticed that if they added the chili pepper to their kimchi, not only did it bulk out the kimchi and add more food to it, that was apparently pretty cheap because they're easy to grow here, it also made them chili peppers have antimicrobial properties. It's a thing that's supposed to make us not eat them, actually, and yet humans are like, we don't care how much it hurts, we're going to eat it anyway. But that burn is part of a chili pepper's defense mechanism, and humans just ignore it. We're such a great species. But it's also antimicrobial, part of its defense mechanism. So adding chili peppers to things like kimchi ferments prolongs its shelf life immensely, right? And so for people, especially at the lower end of the spectrum, socioeconomic spectrum, prolonging the shelf life of fermented vegetables is a key function. Whereas the aristocrats in Korea, in Joseon, no, they wanted nothing to do with that painful, spicy crap. So, so it isn't actually until the 20th century that gochu, that gochugaru, that gochu, that the chili peppers, that the powder becomes a staple of Korean cuisine that everyone eats. And that's the consequence of Korea being so poor through the Korean War, right? So it's a very recent introduction to Asian cuisine. So I want you to imagine Indian curry with no chili peppers. I want you to imagine Thai curry with no chili peppers. Imagine all of those Chinese dishes with no chili peppers. And that gives you a much better idea of what cuisine was, what medieval cuisine was like in Asia. First, subtract the chili peppers. Then subtract corn, potatoes, and tomatoes, and green beans. And you'll get a much better idea of cuisine in medieval Asia. Let's see. Daniel says, I'm somewhat of a knight myself. Daniel, are you a Hemaist? Do you practice historical European martial arts? Do you do harness fighting? A lot of people in my community do harness fighting or some form of historical European martial art based on actual medieval fighting manuals, which you might not know, but there's actually medieval manuals of combat that tell people exactly how to fight. Pretty, better even than dance manuals in many cases. When Chili's first dropped, people were probably so jazzed about it, like running around telling everyone about it. No, Upert, when Chili's first dropped, everyone hated them, according to the primary sources. When Chili's first made their way to Europe and Asia, most people tasted them and said, "Oh my God, this is terrible." It took centuries for people to numb themselves to the pain. So Twitchy comments, that would make sense when you think about the wide trade of peppercorns, that and cloves would be the spice rather than the numbing. Yep. That is, it's kind of, and that's part of the problem, right? Is that in English, especially, we stopped calling them chili peppers, and started calling them peppers. And so now people think that peppercorns come from peppers, but they're not even the same kind of plant, not even from the same part of the world. Peppercorns come from a creeper vine that is tropical in nature and from South Asia, specifically Sri Lanka, and it also grows well in India, but not even at all related to capsicum, to any of the capsicums. And just like Szechuan peppercorns are not related to chili peppers at all, and are not peppercorns, they're yet another creeper. They're another species altogether. So I can eat 15th century Asian food. I'm allergic to peppers, not black pepper, but the hot ones. Yeah, so Captain Rail, you would totally be able to eat 15th century Asian food. No problem. No chili peppers, none at all. Not a single one, nowhere to be found. Yeah, it's fascinating how much those ingredients from the so-called New World, from the Americas, just have revolutionized cuisine all over the planet, everywhere. But it took a while. Tomatoes are another one that took a long time to be uptaken for multiple reasons, not any one reason, but many. One, tomatoes look a lot like mandrake fruit. And mandrake fruit is toxic, and they knew it was toxic. So some people said, no, I'm not trying that. It's not worth it. Other people who did try it then tended to serve it on pewter plates. Pewter in the Middle Ages consisted of lead. Tomatoes are acidic. The acid leached out the lead and made the food toxic. It poisoned the people. The people died. So people thought, oh God, tomatoes are poisonous, right? So there's a couple of different good reasons. Then there was some theories they looked like wolf peach. They called them wolf peaches, and they thought that they turned people into werewolves. So there's all these different reasons that people, when tomatoes were first brought back by the Columbian exchange, that people said, nah, just no. But sometime in about the 18th century, but so why were they here at all then? They were decorative, just like the chili pepper plants were decorative. They were decorative. But they're perennials, so they would do their thing, and then the fruit would rot, and the fruit would get tossed in a midden, right? It would get tossed in a trash heap. Eventually, some probably poor people noticed that the animals were eating the tomatoes and not dying. And so it was probably the poor people who were starving otherwise. Remember, post-medieval, we're talking 18th century when things were getting bad because of the Industrial Revolution, right? So it was probably some poor people who noticed that the animals were eating the tomatoes and not dying that started eating them. And then it was a grassroots movement. And then it moved up from there, right? But it's actually in Spain where that first happens, not Italy. How crazy is that? The tomato sauce, which everyone associates so heavily with Italy, starts in Spain. And it starts because the way they first start preparing the tomatoes, once they figure out they're not toxic and to just not eat them on a freaking lead plate, they cut them up and they saute them with garlic and onions. Super yummy, right? But that starts in the 18th century, and it's a bottom-up revolution instead of a top-down culinary revolution. Yeah. Yeah. Oof, the lead leaching. Yeah. Yeah. Pineapples were a hit. I don't think they put them on pewter plates. Yeah. Let me see. Back in medieval times, people would go to blacksmiths to get their teeth pulled. I haven't found, Daniel, have you found evidence, primary source evidence of blacksmiths being the ones who pulled teeth? There were dentists, actually. Not that you would necessarily want the treatments, but there were dentists. Hungary without paprika. Yeah, Rupert. So Hungary and Spain were two places with the earliest uptake of capsicum in Europe. They were very early. They started in the 17th century. And the Hungarians did, they're the ones who basically revolutionized, the idea of drying the peppers and using the skin to make paprika. But yeah, imagine Hungarian food with no paprika. It's really fascinating. Imagine German food or Irish food with no potatoes. Imagine French country cuisine with no potatoes. Imagine Belgium with no French fries. French fries with no frites. These little things. But imagine Italian food with no tomato sauce. And you can definitely see that tomorrow in my Valentine's Day special medieval cooking party. It's actually a baking party. We're going to be making an actually sweet cheesecake. It will not be a disaster like the last one, I promise. And this is from an Italian, a Neapolitan cookbook. And there's, not a single nightshade in it. No tomatoes at all. Nothing even vaguely of the flavor profile of tomato sauce in this dish. Now, what there is in medieval Italian cuisine in spades, it's pasta. Pasta was absolutely a medieval European thing, and it wasn't just in Italy. They had the dish called lozenges, which is what lasagna would become. It's a pasta dish, and it's called that because the noodles were actually cut in lozenge shape. They were cut in those diamonds, although it might actually be the reverse. Lozenges might be called that because the pasta was cut in the diamond shape. I have to double check on the etymology. Anyway, lozenges is what lasagna was called in medieval English, and we have recipes in France and England and Iceland and Germany and Spain for what we call lasagna. But again, lasagna with no tomato sauce. Medieval lasagna consisted of cheese and sweet spices like cinnamon and ginger. So you would actually have your layer of pasta and butter too. Cheese, spices, and butter in between each layer of pasta. And then, yes, it was sometimes baked, but it was sometimes just served that way. Just the noodles were already cooked and you just served it after layering it up. But there was a really disturbing reference to, a Black Death reference. Moving away from Valentine's Day to the Black Death. Food reference. Oh, yay, halabang. Halabang. Halabang.
I was going to give you fruit for Valentine's, but now you're talking about the Black Death.
So for those who are wondering, this is not an orange, technically. This is halabang. This is a citrus fruit that comes from Jeju Island. And I love these things because they're always tart and sweet at the same time, and sour. And I love sweet and tart and sour together. I don't like perfumey oranges. So my condottiero just gave me a Valentine in orange. Because remember, in the Middle Ages, fruit, especially if you're not in the Mediterranean, if you are in Northern Europe, citrus fruit like this was an extreme luxury good. Now, I know that they gave, in general, a gift could absolutely be fruit, especially citrus fruit in France and Flanders and Germany and England. Now, I don't have a specific reference to it being, a love token, but this is a very expensive piece of fruit in the Middle Ages. So this is one how this would be a deep sign of affection for someone to spend all the money on this citrus and then give it as a gift. Yeah. I love this so much. And I love they're so freshly picked. This thing is so freshly picked that the leaves are actually still supple. Jeju is a volcanic island off the south coast of Korea, and it's basically Halasan. Mount Hala is just a giant cone volcano like Mount Rainier. And it's got, like most volcanic islands, it's got super rich black soil from eons of volcanic eruptions. And so they have a lot of citrus fruit plantations on Jeju. And this was probably freshly shipped today. In fact, that's how supple this leaf is. Yeah. The smell of citrus. Okay. I'm not going to eat that on the camera, but I want to. Let me see. Are they near to Tangelos? Yeah, so that's a good question. I've never had a Tangelo. I don't know. So the flavor is orange. It is orange flavored, but it's invariably sour and sweet together. And they're juicy, but they're not too juicy. So it's the skin peels off and it sections really easily. But it's, sour and sweet at the same time. My favorite. I'm sweet, and because that's me. I'm sweet and sour. Yeah, Twitchy, if you come visit us in Korea, we'll eat halabong together. We'll go out and have a picnic in one of those beautiful pavilions by the river with halabong. Because in Korea to this day, fresh fruit is considered a dessert, and it's considered an expensive gift. Fruit is expensive here, actually. It's one of the few foodstuffs that is expensive. So you can actually get gift boxes of halabong, for instance. So if I were to go to someone's house for dinner, I should bring a box of fruit as a gift, as a host gift. Yeah. We bring wine in the West. In Korea, they bring fruit, which is more nutritious. I think we all know. Anyway, back to the lasagna topic. So found a very disturbing reference to lasagna in a chronicle discussing the Black Death in Florence and how they dealt with the Black Death. And it might even have been Petrarch writing. It might have been Petrarch writing. I've got to go back and check the attribution though, but the quote is definitely true. So basically, again, paraphrased, the chronicler describes the burying of the people as follows. He says that people were dying in about 4 months. 60% of Florence's population dies. So I'm just putting that out there. 60% of the population dies in 4 months during the Black Death. That's immense. And it was almost impossible for them to keep up with the burial rates. So they just started digging, they just dug mass pits. They dug massive burial pits. And the process, according to this chronicler, was in the morning, they would take the people who had died in the night and they would dump their body in the pit, and they would sprinkle on a layer of dirt, and then they put on the next layer of bodies and sprinkle on a layer of dirt, and so on, like a horrifying lasagna. He actually referred to this burial style as like making a lasagna. You're probably never going to eat lasagna again. I'm sorry. I have a stomach of iron, so these kinds of things don't disturb me. Oh my goodness, yeah. So tomorrow we will not be making lasagna, although I think I'm going to do a medieval cooking party where I demonstrate the making of lasagna. We'll actually make the noodles together. I will do a version, I don't eat wheat, so I will do a wheat-free version of the noodles, but the process will still be the same. So from your perspective, it will look the same. And we'll roll the noodles out, and then I will make them using the different, there's a couple of different lasagna recipes with different spices and different layerings, and we'll do that. And then you can see the difference and really appreciate the difference between a modern lasagna, which is actually more complicated to make than a medieval lasagna because there are fewer ingredients in a medieval lasagna. But what's interesting about lasagna noodles in a lot of these 15th century Italian recipes is they're not just used like on their own as a pasta dish. They actually get like baked into pies, savory pies. There is one cheesecake recipe or cheese pie recipe that actually talks about, and if you want, you can add some lasagna noodles into the pie. Just kind of put it in there with the cheese and the eggs and the spices. Yeah. I never liked lasagna anyway. Yeah, Holly, now I want to find a tangelo. I love pomelos. I love pomelos and I love grapefruit. I like mandarins or tangerines when they are the tart ones. I don't like the sweet and perfumey ones, if that makes sense, but I do love pomelos. And that's another great thing about Thailand. If you go to Thailand these days, fresh fruit literally grows on trees that grow like weeds. And so fresh fruit is super inexpensive in Thailand. And there's all sorts of street vendors who are carts. Their cart, all they sell is fresh fruit that has been prepared and packaged for you to take and eat while you walk. So fresh mango, peeled, removed from the pit, sliced into spears, put in a little baggie for you. I wish they would use paper baggies instead of plastic baggies or the bamboo baggies or the palm leaf baggies that they used to use. Anyway, super cheap. 2 mangoes worth of mango spears is the equivalent of like 50 cents US. Yeah, which is an insanely small amount of money for any mango, let alone 2 mangoes that have been peeled and cut and separated from the core so that you can just easily enjoy them as you walk around. Yeah, Thailand is absolutely a paradise for fruit lovers. Yeah. Let me see. I might have to make a medieval take on lasagna, but a savory one, so black pepper forward. Oh yeah, Yupert? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really love the combination of the sweet spices with the powerful spices like black pepper and ginger, right? Like black pepper and ginger are pretty prevalent in a lot of the medieval lasagna recipes. Not so much sugar. I mean, there's cinnamon, but sugar is only used. I think there's a couple that where sugar is used, but it's used in the same way that salt is, like just a tiny bit just to make the flavors pop, not enough to make it sweet at all. In fact, I would posit that a modern red tomato sauce from Italy has more sugar in it, and I mean added sugar. Your mouth is bleeding from the pineapple. Too acidic? Were you eating too much pineapple? Oh. Yeah. Now I want to eat. Now I want to eat my halabong. Way too much. Yeah. Thailand is really great for fruit lovers. Thailand is also starting to do those costume experiences like they do here in Korea, where it's traditional Korean costuming. And that's actually starting to get to be problematic because a lot of the sites, the historic sites at which they're doing this are temple complexes. And temple complexes, depending on the complex, aren't necessarily big and roomy like a palace is. So you have all of these people in their traditional Thai costumes, which is to say traditional circa 1950 Thai costumes, and they are being followed around by a photographer because part of the costume experience now is a professional photographer, and they're literally everywhere. So instead of just walking around and enjoying the space and occasionally snapping their own picture, it's like a photo shoot, but there's like 150 photo shoots happening at once in a temple complex. And it's actually becoming a menace to the point where the authorities they're going to look at possibly banning it, making it illegal to actually have a professional photographer follow you around these sites, because it was a menace. It was so hard to get anywhere or to see anything without 10 people standing in front of exactly the same chedi, wearing almost exactly the same clothes, doing almost exactly the same poses. You could tell that these professional photographers were professionals and they had a very specific menu of things to do. They took them to exactly the same places. I don't think these people doing the costume experiences ever actually looked at the temple. Honest to Christ. I think all they did was hold poses. I watched, and I never saw their eyes actually observe anything. I never saw them take a single moment to appreciate the historical beauty of this space. It's tragic. It really is. Oh, Captain, are you allergic? You're allergic to pineapple? Honestly, I don't really like pineapple. It's a little too sweet for me. I would probably appreciate an unripe pineapple or a less ripe pineapple, but usually the pineapple that's served is very juicy and sweet, and I'm not a juicy and sweet kind of girl. I'm a crunchy, hard, and bitter kind of girl. It's one of the reasons I love Thailand is they actually sell green mango spears for you to enjoy and eat. I like it to be a little sweet, like sweet enough that it doesn't cause crippling pain, but I do prefer to err on the side of sour than on the side of sweet. Yeah. So let's see, what else did I have for you today? I had a whole bunch of fun stuff on that notepad for you all. Yeah, I've been wandering down, the path of I've been seriously exploring a couple of different things. I've been exploring medieval hairstyling treatments because I am on a quest to find a not destructive way to create those beautiful 15th century curls in my hair. The only way that I can really document at this point is either using some pretty powerful chemicals, medieval chemicals, but chemicals, or a curling iron. And I don't want to do the curling iron because I don't want to damage my hair. And I don't really want to use some of these chemicals because they're toxic. So I'm hoping to find some kind of documentation for, some other kind of curl, a manual curl. And I may have found it, sort of. I may have found it. There's this 12th century treatise called the Trotula. Some of you are familiar with the Trotula. That is a book of not only women's gynecology and women's diseases, but also of women's beauty treatments. And there's one recipe for making the hair curl. And you take Danewort. I just did a post on this. You take Danewort and you grind it in oil. And then it says, and you apply it to the hair and you tie it up with leaves. Okay, now that last part, at first I baffled, I was a little, yeah, that bemused me a little bit. It befuddled me a little bit. But I made a post about it and some people suggested something, and it was a thought I'd kind of already I'd started to foment myself. And this idea is that the leaves are actual leaves, Danewort leaves. And you're actually using those like curlers, right? So you just curl up the leaf and you wrap your hair around it and then you tie it up around the leaf. Now, yeah, why not? It makes total sense. Rag curls, which as far as I can't document them to the Middle Ages or the Renaissance at all. I have no evidence of rag curls, none. And the reason why I think they would not have been around in the Middle Ages is because fabric is just too expensive to devote it to something like rag curls. It's too precious. By the time rag curls are coming along, the Industrial Revolution has started and fabric is much, much, much less expensive. But leaves from a weed like Danewort, which is a kind of elder shrub, basically like an elder tree, but a shrub, leaves are renewable. They're free. They cost nothing. And they're flexible, right? So yeah, that would make sense as something that everyone could afford to wrap their hair around and make it curly. And if you're already using the roots of the Danewort, well, if you're using the roots, then you've probably dug the thing up. So now you have all these leaves, right? So you might as well use them. So stay tuned. There are elder trees somewhere around here. It's not leaf season though, it's winter. But stay tuned for when we have leaves again. I'm going to see if I can find some elder leaves of some species of elder, and I'm going to experiment at the very least with the manual curling around the leaf and see what we can come up with. Yeah, of course, I read about this and discover it in the dead of winter, but spring is coming. I think we'll have leaves by, April or May. Yeah. Have I found any references to using gums for hair curling? If you're talking about like gum arabic, Yes. In 16th century sources. In a 16th century Italian source I have, there is a concoction that involves mastic gum, I think, actually. But that some of those sources involve some really hard materials, and I mean that literally. There was like, I don't know, 25 different recipes in on the ornamentation of women, from 1574. I just published a short that actually talks about this source. And I think there's got to be at least 20 recipes for hair curling concoctions. And one of them involves taking the shavings, steel shavings. It involves taking steel shavings and steeping them in a concoction of a bunch of other stuff. So basically it's iron. Um, and I'm wondering what that's going to do to your hair. But yeah, one of those concoctions involved gum mastic. That's a 16th century source, though. I haven't found it earlier than that yet. The one from the 12th century is just oil and dane root. Then Caterina Sforza has a really strange one. She's got a very interesting curling recipe for curling hair. She says to take the horn of a castrated sheep, a castrated goat specifically, and grind it, to burn it, and then grind it, and then mix it with oil, common oil. She says common oil. I'm going to assume that's olive oil, but maybe I'm wrong. I haven't looked too deeply into what common oil might be to Caterina Sforza, but she composed this in the late 15th century, and there's a copy of it from like 1507. These are her experiments. So that's an interesting one. I'm wondering, what about the castrated sheep? The castrated ram's horn would actually be special and specific for making your hair curl, or if it's just easier to get a hold of a castrated sheep's horn than a ram that hasn't been castrated. Am I a nun? No, definitely not. Twitchy, does this look very nun-like to you? No, there's a couple of reasons I'm not a nun. One, you can see some of my hair like this. Two, big, deep neckline. Three, very, very ostentatious jewelry around my neck, my collar, right? Yeah, so definitely not a nun. I'm wearing what I call my late 15th century Lululemon at home sewing with friends ensemble, basically. Very not. Yeah, very, very not a nun. So much not. Let me see. Oh, Bramley apples. Yeah, that sounds delicious. Right. So, yeah. Talking about the curling of hair. Yeah, a lot of people keep chiming in with rag curls, rag curls, rag curls. Again, I've got zero evidence of rag curls or threaded curls. The only reference now that it might be threaded, in other words, the curls are secured with some kind of tie, is that reference from the 12th century Trotula that says that you should apply this oil of ground up danewort and oil mixture, this concoction, this there's a better word for it, but anyway, this mixture of ground danewort and oil, and then that you tie it up with leaves. That's the only reference I have that I have found thus far to tying curls. However, I'm going to run with it because the Trotula is a compendium that comes from Salerno, Sicily, which was a great center of medical learning, famous across Europe, including famous for having female physicians, by the way, learned women of medicine. And this source was so respected that it was copied. It was actually written originally in Sicilian vernacular, so in a southern Italian vernacular in the 12th century. And it's so popular that it gets translated into Latin all the way up to the end of the 14th century, and it is copied everywhere in Europe. It's everywhere to be found. There are hundreds of copies of this manuscript, as far as I'm aware. And then in the 15th century, it continues to be popular enough that it is then translated into vernacular languages again. It's translated into German and French and Irish, by the way. and back into vernacular, more up-to-date vernacular Italian. It's translated into Spanish, right? That's how popular this tome is. So I think it is perfectly reasonable to say that something that I find in the Trotula in a 15th century Italian version of the book could well be something that the ladies were still doing in 15th century Italy, because this book continues to be copied. And what's more, other medical treatises from the Middle Ages steal, purloin entire passages from the Trotula and incorporate them into their own medical treatises and claim them as their own. So that kind of indicates how much of the teachings from the Trotula stayed current and stayed relevant throughout the Middle Ages. So yeah, I'm going to try to get some Danewort, and I'm going to try to get some elder leaves and see what we can do. See what happens. But I do need to find out. There's one thing I have to find out. Any of you are chemists out there. And you might happen to know just how toxic Danewort root actually is, and how much of the toxins would be absorbable by the skin. Because one thing about elder, most parts of most elder species of elder are toxic. Now, in some cases, thermal acceleration can eliminate the toxicity, meaning cooking, but in other cases, not so much. So if you are familiar, if you have an idea of how toxic how much of that toxicity would be absorbable by the skin, do let me know. I will do my own research in the meanwhile, but I just recently, like 2 days ago, stumbled across this concoction in the Trotula, so I'm still reading up on it. It's a work in progress, basically. I've not met other people allergic to chilies before. My condottiero is allergic to chili peppers. They unleash a very unpleasant response in his digestive system. Yeah. No. Villa Vendetta, it is absolutely it's a real thing. Chili peppers absolutely cause an allergic reaction. And honestly, chili peppers cause a reaction in everyone. It's just that most people ignore the pain. Yep. Okay. Okay, Han, we'll see you later. Sleep well, my dear. Sleep well. Would Roman hairstyling methods still be used to style hair? Would Roman style, oh wait, I'm sorry, I missed some comments. I apologize. Crispy, thank you so much. Appreciate the compliment. Let me see. I've met, right, Roman hairstyles. Roman hairstyles, would they have been used? Do you mean would they still have been used in the Middle Ages? And by which do you mean Roman hairstyling techniques? In Europe? I haven't seen any evidence of that continuity. And I think I know why. I think I know why there is a discontinuity between, I know why there's a discontinuity between a lot of ancient Roman techniques and the Middle Ages, and it's not what people think. It's not the invasions by the barbarians. No, it's not, because almost all of the so-called barbarians, those migratory tribes of peoples who came from the steppes and migrated into Western Europe in the late Roman Empire and a little bit thereafter, they adopted Roman culture because they liked it, because they liked the civilized life. No, what killed Roman technology and culture and techniques was the Justinian plague, which killed 90% of Europe. That's in the 6th, and then it starts off, it has an initial die-off, and then it just continues for 150 years. Kind of the same way the Yersinia pestis from the Black Death going forward continues every 10 to 20 years in a cycle. It kills 90% of Europe's population. When you have that level of die-off, technology breaks. People forget there aren't enough human resources left to maintain the knowledge base, right? So that's mostly why Roman technology eventually fails. That's why the aqueduct stops working. That's why the bathhouses stop working. That's why the plumbing stops. That's why people forget how to build domes. Literally, we forgot how to build domes. But it's the Justinian plague. It just kills off so many people that there aren't enough people left to be able to devote their energy to that kind of high tech. They have to devote their energy to just surviving. So I don't have much evidence of those very sophisticated and complex ancient Roman hairstyling techniques continuing into the Middle Ages. Now, the Eastern Roman Empire is a different ball of wax, right? I'm not talking Constantinople. That's why I keep trying to emphasize Western Europe, because Eastern Europe is a different game in a lot of ways. Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, Romans, yeah, they had curling irons and all kinds of things, and they could build domes, right? And they had cement, right? They had this magic cement recipe that hardens underwater, right? That's all lost, and it's the Justinian plague that causes it to be lost. Yep, losing all of that. So it's really fascinating how the Justinian plague is not taught in Western, certainly not in high school history classes. It wasn't taught in my high school history class. I learned about the Justinian plague outside of a formal educational environment. And it's such a massive turning point in Western European civilization that it's even a turning point in Eastern Europeans. Like the Justinian plague has a horrible impact on the Eastern Roman Empire. That is sort of the start of the end for the Eastern Roman Empire. It's the Justinian plague, right? It weakens the Eastern Roman Empire so severely that it positions it to be conquered by successive waves of people, again, coming from mostly the East. Steppes peoples. I say mostly because, of course, the Arab conquest is not from the East, it's kind of from the South, I guess. Yeah. But, it weakens it severely. And it's just this big, massive, traumatic event in European history. And it just doesn't even get mentioned. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah. And Villa Vendetta, exactly right. Like they have now finally we have now finally rediscovered the recipe for Roman cement, right? We think we have finally rediscovered the recipe for Greek fire, right? Like all these things that were lost in large part because of the Justinian plague, right? We're just now getting back to it. Let me see. I believe it was chunks of lye in the middle as it cracked water, entered cracks, caused reaction and self-heat. Self-healing, right. That it knits itself, right? Yeah. Yeah, for those who don't know, look it up. Read up on ancient Roman cement. It's amazing. So amazing. By the way, if you're enjoying this live stream, then please like and subscribe. So back to the topic of medieval hygiene. Let's talk about laundry, actually. So I had some questions. In one of my recent videos, I discussed the importance of these white underlayers, the white underwear, the smock, and also the importance of headdresses like this and keeping your hair clean. And I mentioned in that video about how to launder them, because this is the layer that's going to be laundered, right? The white linen layers are the layers that can take a beating, literally, in the case of laundry practices in the Middle Ages, and keep on ticking, right? This wool overlayer would not be laundered. It wouldn't be wet laundered. It would be spot treated. If there were smells, it would be treated for the smell. Apparently, there's a wine, supposedly a solution of wine will remove the smell, but that will also then leave a stain. But then there's treatments for wine stains as well, right? So they had dry cleaning methods for removing stains, or even a little bit spot treatments also that were wet methods that were used for cleaning overgarments. But it's the undergarments that everyone wore that got laundered, right? And one of the laundry methods, one of the big parts of pre-modern laundry, pre-18th century laundry, is ammonia, which was obtained uniquely through fermented urine. So yes, fermented urine was a major player in medieval laundry practices, because fermented urine, being ammonia, is an alkali. It's a base. And alkali solutions, basic solutions are excellent at removing grease, at removing stains, and therefore bleaching things back to white. And also they're antimicrobial. But some people commented, well, wouldn't that make the garments smell terrible? Yes, but then you can use a vinegar solution to rinse it, and that will break down the ammonia. That will cause the ammonia to break down and evaporate, basically. And also, I've been given to understand that ammonia will eventually evaporate. It's volatile, but certainly the ammonia that my cats put on things doesn't seem to evaporate on its own. So a vinegar solution can be used to then remove the ammonia stain or the ammonia smell. But ammonia was a key part in keeping garments white. And ammonia is so much better for bleaching garments than chlorine bleach is. Chlorine bleach is terrible. It is awful for your garments, guys. It's destructive. It literally degrades the fibers, which is why garments that get bleached again and again and again eventually literally fall apart, right? Ammonia doesn't do that. It softens the fibers, but it doesn't break them down like that. So ammonia is actually the superior bleaching agent in every way, and was a very, I mean, ammonia was like the magic chemical, the magic chemical of the medieval world. It was used for everything. It was used in tanning. It was used in dyeing. It was used in laundry. It was used to clean armor, right? You know, some of you wonder about cleaning armor in the Middle Ages. Well, armor was not made of stainless steel. They didn't have stainless steel, so it was made of mild steel, which meant it would rust at the drop of a hat. Urine, a combination of urine and sand, was a great combination to actually scrub your armor clean and remove rust. Yeah, so urine for the win. People actually drink their own fermented urine nowadays. What? Seriously? Who is doing that? Why? Why are they doing that? That doesn't sound like a good plan. You shouldn't drink ammonia. Ammonia is not good. No, that's a bad plan. Oh my God. But knowing it's effectively ammonia is even weirder. Yeah, so ammonia, no. Why are people doing that? What is wrong with you people? Don't drink fermented urine. Save it and use it in your laundry. Oh my gosh. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, so there was that comment about urine. Someone else also debated the idea. They completely did not get, or they dispute, there's the word I'm looking for. They disputed the concept of using, of one, beating your laundry to get it clean, and two, laying it out on grass for the bleaching. Okay, so I will explain that. So the medieval laundry process was basically this. First off, it involved hot water that was boiled, and laundresses, there were a whole cadre of professional laundresses, and laundresses could work independently, or they could work together, or bathhouses also offered laundry services where you could turn in your linens to be cleaned. They would have them laundered because bathhouses had water boilers, and then you could get them back. Right, but part of the process was bringing water to a boil in a giant cauldron, in a giant pot, or even multiple pots, as we've seen displayed in some of the depictions of medieval laundry day. The linens were put in them, they were stirred, they were soaked, they were brought to temperature, then they were soaked in ammonia. And soap was they did have soap, although you didn't necessarily need to use the soap depending on how effective the ammonia was, because again, ammonia is really good at getting both grease and stains out. Then on really tough stains, they would actually use beaters to beat them on a rock. And that would actually help the ammonia and the soap, if they were using soap, penetrate the garments more deeply. It's better than scrubbing. Scrubbing is not super great for your fabric. Scrubbing, like this action, will actually cause mechanical deterioration, whereas the beating causes less deterioration from what I've been given to understand. And it also actually causes the ammonia and the soap to penetrate more deeply. Also, it apparently was a good way to try to beat out the lice from your garments if your garments had lice. But not all medieval people had lice infestations. It was not as common as the Victorians wanted us to believe. And so lice was not necessarily as big of an issue as people think it was. It was an issue. I'm not saying it wasn't, but it wasn't as big of an issue. But the beating could help with the lice as well, or other things inhabiting your garments. Right. And then it would be rinsed thoroughly in clean river water, or if you don't have a clean river, water that was collected from a cistern. Rainwater was known in the Middle Ages to be extremely clean. And because even if they didn't necessarily understand the cleansing action of clouds, they understood that the rainwater was the best for any outcome, right? Rainwater is what you used for dyeing. Rainwater is what you used for bathing if you could. Rainwater is what is recommended even for cooking, right? So they actually had cisterns that would collect rainwater, big tanks, basically, that they would just leave open and that would collect rainwater. if you had sources from the era do acknowledge, though, that if you have a clean flowing river nearby, then you can use that as well. The Ménagier de Paris actually talks, hear me out on this, fellow people who've lived in Paris and or my Parisian viewers. The Ménagier de Paris in 1391 actually recommends using water from the Seine to do laundry. Yeah, you heard me right. I wouldn't use water from the Seine to clean my car if I had a car, let alone do my laundry. But apparently in 1391, the Seine was clean enough that it was good for laundry. Right. So you can either use water from a nice clean river source, you can use water from a cistern, water from a well if your well, the source of your well is clean. But rainwater was generally acknowledged to be the best because it was also soft water, right? Rainwater has had all the minerals removed from it, so you won't have an issue with hard water. Hard water is, I know this is going to sound reductive, but hear me out. Hard water makes cleaning harder. It doesn't actually penetrate and doesn't break down the grease and the dirt as well as soft water does. Rainwater is softer because it hasn't run through minerals and dissolved minerals into it. The dissolved minerals have been removed by the evaporative process. So that's why cistern water rainwater was almost always recommended in manuals like dyeing manuals and for any kind of purpose where the pH of the water and the mineral content of the water matters. Right. So you would use that water for cleaning your garments. You would rinse your garments in that water, and then they would hang them out on lines or sometimes on shrubs or bushes to dry in the sun, if you had sun, or just to dry, hopefully in the sun. Now, some people say, well, wouldn't hanging it on the bush then make it dirty? Well, not if your bush isn't dirty. Why are your bushes dirty? Don't use a dirty bush, I guess. There's a lot of shrubs that are perfectly clean and you don't have to worry. Like the leaves aren't just going to leak green onto your garments unless the leaves are broken. You have to, for the most part, you have to manually break leaves to break them. They don't just break on their own. So as long as your bush isn't covered in dirt and doesn't have lots of broken leaves, it won't harm your garment. Then after it's dry there, then they generally lay them out on the grass after they've line dried, and then completely flat on the grass allows the sun to access the entire garment evenly, because otherwise if it's hanging on a line, then the sun is at different angles and hits different parts of the garment in different strengths throughout the day, so you're not going to get an even sun bleaching, right? But laying it out on the grassy meadow, grass again, if your grass is dirty, don't put it on the grass. But for the most part, grass is not muddy or dirty unless it's been tromped through when it's wet. Otherwise, grass, especially because medieval grass is going to be long. It's not going to be, okay, well, it depends on the sheep situation, I guess. Don't dry your laundry on a sheep's grazing meadow. Bad plan. You will end up with stained and stinky clothes. But for the most part, grass is not going to be super short on a meadow. It's going to be longish. And so that's going to provide a cushion between the dirt of the soil and your garment. And so laying the garment out to dry on the clean green grass is going to allow it to be completely accessed by the sun, and there's no dirt. On paved surfaces, there will be dirt, but there won't be dirt on the top of the grass. Then you flip it. And you do that for 7 days, and that's going to bleach everything back to a beautiful white. And there is a synergistic action that I've learned more about this between the sun and the grass, but it's the roots actually that seem to actually exude oxygen. But with this UV light actually beating down on the grass, it actually increases the oxygen respiration. And then at nighttime, there's still oxygen respiration happening that actually helps oxygen bleach the garments. So it's a synergistic effect. So doing laundry, yes, it was a process and it took a while. So you weren't going to do it just every day. So no, you're not going to wash your linen garments after one wearing. No one is saying that. But I know from experience that I can wear this at a medieval living history event, doing my full medieval lifestyle for 4 or 5 days, and it's fine. Linen is antimicrobial, it resists bad smells, and it resists dirt and dust, right? After day 5, though, I want it washed. I will do anything. I will pay anyone any amount of money after day 5 to have it washed, or I will wash it myself. But yeah, we have to also remember people talk about body odors and well, wouldn't your clothes stink? People must have smelled so bad. Well, no, first off, as we discussed earlier, someone asked that great question about perfume. Medieval people of all levels of society worked really hard to smell good, right? And they did this through sweets by grinding up sweet smelling herbs or sweet smelling spices into powders and sprinkling it in their hair or in their clothing. They would mix that in with oils and they would then apply those sweet smelling oils to various parts of their body. But here's the other thing, a lot of modern body odors are a product of one, wearing synthetic fibers that cause microbial growth that would not have been a problem in the pre-modern world. Medieval people only wore natural fibers, and natural fibers are all antimicrobial. They don't get smelly and stinky, right? But two, the medieval diet was so much healthier, right? We're modern, especially God in the West, not in the West, in the developed world, we are eating so much garbage. We are eating so many different sorts of processed foods that we are not supposed to be eating. Our diets are completely out of whack and out of balance. And so what that means is that we're producing microbiota and we're developing bacteria that make bad smells. Right. So our body odor is really a consequence of modern living, and it just wouldn't have been such an issue in the Middle Ages. That being said, for example, in the Trotula, there is body odor could occasionally be an issue because there is a concoction for women who have a strong body odor. Is what it says, for women who have a strong body odor, which also means that not all women did. It also means that people noticed if someone had a strong body odor. Further evidence that people were not stinky as a general matter. Okay, everyone, I have no idea what happened. I think there's a gremlin in my phone. YouTube literally shut and wouldn't let me reconnect. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so I don't know where we left off because the stream cut off. What was the last thing you all heard me say? Damn it. In the meanwhile, Suzette, thank you. This color is a replica of a color that belonged to Maria Portinari. It is by one of my channel sponsors, Armor and Castings, and they make a whole host of beautiful replica medieval jewelry. You can check out their website, armorandcastings.com, if you're interested. If anyone's interested in replica medieval jewelry from them, Contessa 10 as one word gets you an extra 10% off your purchase. And they are running a Valentine's Day special right now. Okay, was 7 days standard or was it variable? So Holly, I'm going to assume you're talking about laundering clothing. So 7 days, yeah, was it standard? I can't speak to that because I haven't found enough sources that say that 7 days was standard. 7 days is a number I have seen referred to in some sources. I don't know how standard a 7-day cycle of laundering would have been everywhere across the 1,000 years that is in the Middle Ages. I have found that referenced in 15th century French sources. So I can't answer it on a more general level. I suspect, though, it was variable. Honestly, I think it was variable. I think the higher up on the socioeconomic ladder you go, the more often you washed your laundry. Right? I think people washed their laundry as often as they could afford to, depending on its state of filth and its potential smell. And the reality is that that's going to vary. There are some days that are going to be dirtier days than others. There are some days where the humidity and the air pressure is actually going to either suppress soot in the air or going to increase the amount of soot in the air. There are some days where you're going to sweat more, and that's going to increase the amount of grime that builds up around the edges, right? So I suspect it was variable, but once a week seems to be a number that I've seen referenced in several different sources at the least. Let me see. Oh, see, I missed all of this stuff. They think it's a health thing. We're talking about drinking fermented urine. They actually believe our ancestors did it and think there's a lot of good things in it we can utilize still. Pretty certain ammonia is toxic. I might be wrong about that. Yeah. Yes, I know the stream dropped. It's back up. I know the stream dropped. It's back up. Yeah, I don't know why. Oh, anyway, damn it. I was on a real roll and I don't know what the last thing. Handsome, what's the last comment?
I was walking. Oh, the last comment?
Yeah.
I have to scroll.
Sorry, the stream dropped and now I don't think it's showing me the latest comments. So, oh, let me see. The people would notice if you stink was the last I heard. Okay, thank you, Sabrina. Okay, great. Yes. Medieval people noticed if other people stank, right? And so in this source, the Trotula, great, then you didn't miss too much. In this source, the Trotula, the remedy, and I do want to experiment with this because it's curious. The remedy for body odor involves wine and I think burnt grape leaves, if I recall correctly. But wine was one of the main things. Wine actually makes sense because of the nature of wine, that could actually have a good impact on breaking down smells and preventing smells from developing, especially in the original source actually kind of talks about like, the nether regions, right? So that's something I wanted to try to follow up on that particular recipe and see if that actually works. But we have lots of evidence that people thought uncleanliness was undesirable. There's a romance, Sur l'Enfant from 1400, which is a version of one of Marie de France's lays about Sur l'Enval, right? This young knight who gets basically kidnapped, seduced, and then ultimately kidnapped by a fairy queen, right? Well, he is actually in this story, in this 1400 version of the story, he encounters a poor man who's so poor that his clothes are dirty. And he comments that he's sad that he can't attend mass because his clothes aren't clean, which tells us that obviously it was expected that if you attended mass, your clothes should be clean. And it was expected that everyone should attend mass. Ergo, the normal state of being is clean clothing, not dirty clothing, right? And then there are all these lives of the saints, these hagiographies that talk about these martyrs and their miraculous and or ascetic lifestyles. And one of the things they always comment about as being shocking is the dirty undergarments that these religious men, these pious men wore. I'm Thomas a Becket, for instance. He was wearing a hair shirt that was crawling with handfuls of lice against his skin when he was murdered in Canterbury Cathedral, right? But the chronicler noted it because it was strange. Chroniclers don't note workaday things, like they didn't talk about his hair or his nails or anything because those were all normal. They talked about the abnormality, which was this hair shirt that was crawling with lice and that had left open sores on his body because he didn't change it and clean it. So, we know from stories like that, the way that filthy people are commented on as being shocking and horrifying, that indicates that that was not the status quo. Clickbait was a medieval concept. It just wasn't clicking. It was read bait, I guess. Read bait was absolutely a medieval concept. Chroniclers, therefore, were very fond of noting the exceptional. They weren't fond of noting the workaday because no one would read a workaday chronicle. They just wouldn't. That's the other problem with chronicles is they give us a biased view of any historical society because chroniclers were writers. And unless you're in a society like Joseon where they're obligated to write every single thing down that the king says and does, in most other places, chroniclers are just Clive Cussler of their era, right? Yeah, so there's just so much evidence about medieval people having been clean, having smelled just fine, having kept their homes clean, even poor people. That was another one, raggedy clothes. Someone commented that, and against in one of my several complaints about medieval Hollywood movies and their depictions of medieval material culture, I comment that I hate the way everyone is always depicted in dirty rags And someone actually commented, well, of course everyone wore rags. Everyone was poor and they could only afford one set of clothes. And so obviously the clothes would eventually just become rags. No, just no. Just no on so many levels. Okay. Level 1. Okay. Yes, indeed. Indeed. People in the Middle Ages had, the average person, the majority of people certainly, had many fewer belongings than we have now. Yes, they had way fewer changes of clothing. Most of them had more than one change of clothing, though. We know this because there's a chronicle, and I recently stumbled across this, and I want to go and read the whole chronicler. This gentleman, he goes to Flanders in the 1410s. He goes to this village, and he notes that the people are so poor that they only have one change of clothes, and so they sleep in the same clothes that they stand up in. He notes that because it was unusual that this one village was strangely poor and excessively poor, not normal, right? And the reason that even people on the bottom of society in the Middle Ages would have had more than one change of clothes is because, one, there were secondhand markets all across medieval Europe, and there were very affordable wares there. And we have a depiction of a secondhand market from Bologna from about 1403 that actually shows a clearly very poor man shopping for a replacement for his tattered garments, because his garments have reached the point at which they're in tatters. But there's no one else in this market who is depicted in tatters. It was unusual for someone to be wearing clothes that were in tatters. 2, we have depictions of beggars in clothes that have been massively repaired. And I mean massively repaired, but they've been carefully repaired. They've been carefully patched. The edges have been fixed. The seams have been fixed. Of course, even medieval poor people are going to repair their garments. If you don't repair your garments, they will fall apart more quickly. Keeping the edges neatly sewn up, keeping the hems together, keeping the seams together, patching it, that is going to extend its shelf life. That's going to make it last longer. If you don't repair it, it will disintegrate faster. So people, especially at the bottom of society, had a very vested interest in keeping everything as repaired and neatly repaired. And we have extant garments from what were clearly very poor people. Garments that a tunic, there's one tunic in particular, it's made of 4 different kinds of wool, and then it's patched and repaired, but it is patched and repaired. When the man fell in the bog or was tossed in the bog in his tunic, the tunic was in a good state of repair. He was clearly a poor man, and his tunic definitely was not the state of fashion, but it was repaired and in a good condition when the man probably died violently. So we know that people kept their things in a good state of repair, even poor people. But poor people also had access to resources that ceased to exist during the Reformation and as of the 16th century. One of those resources, when well-heeled members of society died all across medieval Europe, they would frequently actually bequeath new garments to the parish's poor people, to 20 or 30 members of the parish's poor, and the executor, I guess, would decide who that would be. New garments in exchange for them acting as mourners at their funeral and praying for them so that it would shorten their time in purgatory. This happens very, 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 very often. So, the people at the bottom rungs of society were actually often the recipient of new garments. I mean, not like every day, but probably once a year. But also institutions like the charitable hospitals that were operated by the church and by various monastic communities, which are everywhere to be found. Hospitals were not just a place where sick people went. They were an all-encompassing charitable institution. They provided poor people with shelter, with food, with jobs, with job training, and with clothing. So even the poorest of the poor had access to occasional new garments or replacement garments, but they also kept their garments in a state of repair. So this idea that everyone in the Middle Ages is sitting around in the mud waiting for progress to happen is just wrong. Also, Mud was something that medieval people avoided. I just found a story in the life of St. Louis. He was the Louis the 11th of France, or Louis the 12th, maybe Louis the 12th, the 11th or the 12th. He's Louis the Pious, right? He actually is canonized. He's a very pious king of France in the 13th century. And when they were doing his investigation for canonization, they interviewed dozens, if not hundreds of people who had experienced miracles at his tomb. And one of the people who had experienced a miracle at his tomb, most of the people who experienced miracles at the tomb of St. Louis were extremely poor, by the way. But one of them, she was so poor, she was a widow. She was so poor that she was staying with at the house of a gentleman who was just providing lodging for her for free because she was so poor. She did still have to go out and beg for alms, but on days when there was too much mud, he would actually give her enough alms so that she could live comfortably for the day or until the mud was gone, because she wasn't expected to go out in the mud and get muddy to beg for alms. Medieval people, even the poorest of the poor, didn't think it was a good thing to be muddy, right? And there was a case of one of those pious men I mentioned who literally didn't wash himself so much that he developed so much lice and other parasites that when he died and his garments were given to the poor, another way that poor people received nice garments that were in a good state of repair is that when the wealthy died, sometimes they would just donate a lot of their wardrobe to the poor. But his clothes were so disgusting and so filled with lice that they had to be laundered and deloused before they could be given to the poor, because the poor weren't going to wear dirty, louse-ridden garments, right? So these are the kind of sources that tell us about the actual medieval attitudes towards cleanliness and towards bodily comfort across all levels of society. So the idea of a louse-ridden, dirty, filthy, raggedy medieval society is just wrong. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. Oh, Nevis, you're back. Lovely to see you again. Good to see you again. Let me see. It was also extremely common for people to buy repaired clothes that used to belong to those of higher status before damage. Yeah, Nevis, exactly. The secondhand market, a powerful part of the medieval economy, and everyone had access to it, right? Mud could also be dangerous, like potentially deadly dangerous, although that is more war mud. But yeah, no, Nevis, yes, mud could absolutely be dangerous. Yeah, 100%. No, it's cool, Nevis. It's totally fine. Semester's on. I get that. Yeah. So yeah, we just have so much evidence that the kind of squalid poverty that modern people, and God knows movie makers, associate with medieval society is not medieval. Again, that's Victorian. It's Dickensian practically, but it's definitely Victorian. Poverty in Victorian England, OMG. And in, a lot of the cities in America in the 19th century, OMG, 100%. People sitting in mud waiting for progress to happen because they were too hungry to do anything to help themselves. Yes, 100%. But that's the Industrial Revolution, baby. That's after the Enclosure Acts. That's not the Middle Ages. Human progress, and this is something that bothers me. People assume that human progress and human civilization is a linear function. It is not. It is a sine wave, right? It goes in cycles, right? We have ups and we have downs. We do not have linear progression, technologically speaking. If the Justinian plague hadn't happened, we might be in a completely different place, technologically speaking. If the Black Death happened, we'd be in a different place economically. But yeah, so, just because things were bad in the 19th century doesn't mean that things were worse in the 15th century. But that's definitely what the oligarchs want you to think, because then you'll think that we have it better and we shouldn't want something different because it was way worse in the past. It was worse in the 19th century, but we're heading back to the 19th century, everyone. Hate to tell you that, but that's where we're going. Gilded Age, here we come. So yeah, is there anyone else working on anything? I'm just trying to make my way around this hem. Unfortunately, when I get when I get on one of these tangents, I stop sewing. So I don't get as much sewing necessarily during these sewing parties as I would like to, but I also want to share all the interesting things with you all. Yeah. Tomorrow I'll be doing a Valentine's Day special medieval cooking party. We will be making a cheesecake from a 15th century Italian source that will not go bad like the cherry cheese tart of a month ago did. Let me see. Sabrina asked, was it a thing that some people would drown when washing clothes in the river because their clothes might be weighted down while washing? It was a thing that people drowned in the river, full stop. Yes. So that's another way we know that everyone bathed, because we have cases of drowning in the Thames, for instance, the coroner's reports from medieval drownings. And they were, a lot of people who drowned in the Thames drowned washing themselves, not their clothes. They were actually bathing themselves in the river and they drowned. Washing clothes, I've heard of some cases of people drowning while washing clothes in the river, though not as much. Because usually if they're washing clothes, they're sticking to a really shallow part of the river. But if they're bathing themselves, they're going for a deeper part of the river. So people definitely drowned washing their bodies. Another way we know that even people on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum looked for ways to keep their bodies clean. Less so washing clothing, more often washing their bodies. Reptiles, welcome back. Lovely to see you again. It's been a while, my friend. Where have you been? What have you been doing? We had a wonderful time in Thailand exploring Thai history and Thai culture firsthand. So yeah, it's been a good time. Nevis, you're working on a spindle talisman. So would that have been, is that a talisman? Would that have actually been used for spinning? That's my question for you. Would that have actually been used for spinning? I recently found, gosh, what else was I reading? I recently found a medical healing talisman from the 15th century. It's crazy complicated, and it's like it's a sheet of vellum that's been basically broken down into a grid that's like 8 by 8, and it's got all these squares in it, and each square something different is written, or there's some different sigil. But it was a medical talisman that was, given to patients to help them heal. It was, yeah, I'm pretty certain it was 15th century, and I'm trying to remember where I saw it. It might have actually been in the book on poverty in medieval Paris, but now I have to. I've been doing so much lately. I've been so busy, and I've been absorbing so much information that it's all starting to mix together. An actual talisman consecrated as an astrological talisman. Interesting. Do we know how often women would wash their hair? Also, did they use regular soap? So again, Middle Ages is not a monolith. So I do know that there are multiple medieval treatises on hygiene and health that suggest that people, not just women, people should wash their hair every 3 weeks, is a number that keeps cropping up. Now, how often that was adhered to, I couldn't tell you. There's no way to know. We don't have that kind of data. But if you go based on the treatises of hygiene and health, every 3 weeks seems to be the magic number. They did, Castile soap was a thing, but there are also, more often than not, they use hair washes. Soap doesn't seem to have been used in hair so much, like not a bar of soap. Hair washes were. But the washes they generally have lye in them, because they're usually based on a solution involving potash, which is lye. So it's a kind of soap, right? Lye is the primary saponifant ingredient in most soaps that people understand. So it was a kind of soap, but not like a bar of soap. But they tended to use hair washes. And the method seems to be, and I've experimented with this, I've demonstrated this. If you check out my live stream recordings, go back to August, I actually did a live stream on washing hair. If you just go to the channel and look up washing under my content, hair washing, it should bring it up. I actually did a full demonstration in a 15th century pavilion of the whole process, right? I didn't have the solution there. I did actually use a medieval bar of soap, but mostly what I see people recommending is actually this lye-based solution, and in the trotula, it's actually grapevines that are burnt for the process, and then you actually just pour it over your hair and you comb it through. And that makes sense because the lye solution would remove the grease, and combing it would then kind of finalize that. And then you wouldn't have to worry about rinsing that out, right? You just comb it out. So that seems to be more often what was used for hair. Soap was used for washing a wide variety of things, including clothing, and seems to have and seems to have also been used for washing in tubs, like washing your body. But especially probably for the parts where you have really stubborn dirt, which if you are a woman wearing long skirts, you are going to end up with very dirty legs. You can, again, check out my medieval living history live streams from late July, early first week in August, and you'll see what I mean. The dirt that is picked up by skirts brushing along the ground, even indoors, your skirts act like a vacuum, and so your legs end up pretty gross at the end of the day with dust that's just kind of combined with the oils and sweat from your skin, and soap is kind of necessary to scrub that off. That concoction is pretty sticky. Yeah. How much of the natural, I'm going to assume the natural oils is what you meant to say. How much of the natural oil is that removing? A little or most of it. So was it saponifying on the hair? The lye solution is not bubbly. It doesn't bubble. It's not going to create soap bubbles, right? But it's a basic solution. And so that is going to remove grease, but it's not going to remove all of it. And that's the benefit to it. So no, Nevis, it does not strip your hair. It does not strip your hair like modern shampoos do. You still have a lot of the natural oils in there, but it removes the excess. And the combing part helps actually comb out the detritus, which is why if you see women washing their hair in an actual medieval depiction, they're actually bent over a basin, their hair is flipped over their head, they're pouring water, some kind of liquid, probably the solution over top of it, and the other hand is combing, right? It's easier if you have someone else doing the pouring. Honest to Christ, I've tried it myself. Boy, it's hard to do it yourself, but probably with more practice, I'd get better at it. Have I seen anything about soapwort plant? I have not seen soapwort mentioned for hair care. I have seen it mentioned in herbals, but I haven't seen it mentioned in hair care. Yeah, that's a good question, Jaws. And I haven't seen it mentioned in the context of body care. I think I've seen it mentioned in the context of laundry, actually, of doing laundry. Yep. Okay, so everyone, we're nearing the 3-hour mark. I would like to thank you all. I give you one chance for any final questions while I drink some tea, because I've been talking this whole time and definitely not drinking enough tea. Right here, not going anywhere, not going anywhere. Yeah, any final questions? Tomorrow will be my medieval cooking party Valentine's Day special. We will be making a cheesecake that is actually sweet from an actual 15th century Neapolitan recipe. So stay tuned for that, Yelenas. I'm going to be doing a medieval story time at some point this weekend because we've got some fun readings, and I'm going to try to focus them on Valentine's Day relevant readings, including some of the original Valentine's Day letters that have survived from the 15th century. I would like to thank my channel members and my patrons on Patreon for supporting my work. I would like to thank all of you who leave super chats and contribute financially to my research and recreation of medieval material culture and sharing of that knowledge. I would like to thank all of my subscribers and all of you who comment and always hit the like and are just devoted followers and part of my community. I've really enjoyed building this community, and I would like to keep it going. Yep. If you had any questions and I did not answer them, pop them in the comments after the video posts and I will get to them and I will answer them, I promise. Oh, thank you for that comment, Nolan, or that compliment. Tupac, I'll take it 100%. That's a great compliment. Otherwise, until next time, everyone, may your adventures be creative, and I do hope to see you at my cooking party. And please, if you have friends or family members or a community of your own who might enjoy my brand of medieval and historical exploration and creativity, then please do share my channel and my videos with them. And I really appreciate all of you just being part of this experiment. Oh, thoughts on Super Bowl halftime show in Spanish. Generally, the Spaniards were in the New World before the English speakers were by 100 years. And a lot of what is now the United States spoke Spanish before it spoke English. Need I say more? um, yeah, so the halftime show being in Spanish is fine with me. A lot of this country, millions of people in the United States are native speakers of Spanish. So, yeah. Anyone who's, yeah, those are my feelings on, well, those are my feelings. People who were offended by it maybe need to grow up and get a life and maybe have something really important in their lives. Because honestly, the halftime show, it's sports ball. So it's just not a big part of my life. But in general, major things happening in Spanish in the United States, again, Spanish was spoken in most of what is the United States long before English was. And we took over vast parts of this country from either Spain or Mexico. So yeah, those are my feelings. Oh yeah, ICE is totally the Gestapo, 100%. That I totally agree. Yeah. Um, yeah. I'm fine with the Super Bowl show being in Spanish. Don't care. Spanish is also one of my languages, so maybe that's why I care less. But also, it's a show that lasted for 20 minutes, 30 at most. Yeah, yeah. And ICE is definitely the Gestapo, 100%. YouTube, please don't ban my channel for saying that. But yeah, I agree. Don't forget to like and subscribe, everyone. Until tomorrow or until next time, may your explorations of history be creative. Until then, everyone, have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world.